The chamber has been sealed for more than 3,000 years. No footsteps. No breath. No sound, only the weight of stone pressing against stone, holding its secret in perfect silence. Somewhere behind these walls lies a body wrapped in linen, a face once kissed by sunlight, a heart that once feared and hoped exactly as we do now. The ancient Egyptians believed this silence was not emptiness. They believed it was a pause. A waiting. A threshold. What if death was never meant to be the end? Imagine standing at the edge of your own final moment, not with panic, but with certainty. Not wondering if something comes next, but knowing precisely what awaits you, every gate, every test, every word you must speak to survive eternity. This was the confidence of the pharaohs. While most civilizations tried to make sense of death after it happened, ancient Egypt built its entire world in preparation for it. To them, death was not chaos. Chaos was forgetting how to live beyond it. The desert night settles in. The air cools. The stars emerge, sharp, eternal, unchanged. The same stars that once guided the souls of kings now watch over a modern world that has forgotten how to listen. Long before science tried to explain death, long before philosophy debated its meaning, the Egyptians believed they had already solved it. And they did not whisper their solution. They carved it into stone, painted it on walls, buried it with their dead, and aligned it with the heavens themselves. They believed the afterlife was real because they believed the universe was ordered. Predictable. Governed by balance. The Nile flooded and receded. The sun died every evening and was reborn each dawn. Seeds vanished into soil and returned as life. Death, to them, followed the same pattern. It was not an ending, it was a transformation. But transformation is dangerous. To die without preparation was to risk dissolution. To forget your name, to lose your body, to fail the judgment waiting beyond the horizon. For the Egyptians, the greatest fear was not punishment. It was annihilation. The terror of being erased forever, leaving no echo, no memory, no return. That fear shaped everything. From the moment a pharaoh took the throne, their death was already underway. Not in despair, but in planning. Every monument, every ritual, every prayer was a calculated step toward eternity. Life itself became a rehearsal for what came after. While we measure success in years, they measured it in permanence. And permanence required knowledge. They believed the afterlife was not forgiving. It did not reward ignorance. It demanded memory, discipline, and moral balance. The dead would be questioned. Tested. Weighed. Those who failed did not burn in torment, they simply ceased to exist. No pain. No rebirth. Just silence. A silence deeper than the tomb itself. So the Egyptians prepared. They wrote instructions for the soul. They preserved the body with near-scientific precision. They wrapped their dead in spells, sealed them with symbols, and surrounded them with tools for a life that never ended. Death was not a leap into darkness. It was a journey through a known landscape, if you knew the way. And the pharaohs believed they knew it better than anyone. To them, kingship did not end at death. It intensified. A pharaoh was not merely human, they were a bridge between worlds. When they died, the balance of the cosmos itself was at risk. The sun might falter. The Nile might fail. Order could collapse into chaos. Their resurrection was not personal, it was cosmic. That belief gave death weight. Purpose. Urgency. Even now, standing at the threshold of these ancient tombs, that urgency lingers. The walls are crowded with images, not of mourning, but of movement. Boats sailing through star-filled waters. Gods extending hands. Figures rising, walking, working, living. This is not art of despair. It is art of instruction. A survival guide etched into eternity. Every color, every symbol, every word mattered. To erase them was to kill the dead a second time. And yet, despite all this certainty, there was doubt. If the afterlife was guaranteed, why the obsession with protection? Why the countless spells, the hidden chambers, the false doors, the curses carved into stone? Why the fear of tomb robbers, not just stealing gold, but breaking the fragile chain between body and soul? Because deep down, the Egyptians understood something timeless: belief does not eliminate fear, it gives it shape. They believed death could be mastered, but only if nothing went wrong. The wrong word spoken. The wrong amulet missing. The heart too heavy with regret. A name forgotten by the living. Any of these could unravel eternity. Immortality was not automatic. It was earned, defended, and constantly threatened. This is where their story becomes deeply human. Strip away the gold and gods, and what remains is a civilization terrified of being forgotten. Terrified that life, no matter how powerful, could dissolve into nothing. Their solution was not denial, but defiance. If death could not be stopped, it could be negotiated with. So they negotiated fiercely. They memorized the afterlife the way sailors memorize stars. They named every danger so it could be overcome. They gave death rules, boundaries, and structure. In doing so, they made it less terrifying, and infinitely more complex. And perhaps that is why their tombs still speak to us. Because in a world obsessed with living faster, the Egyptians asked a quieter question: how do you live knowing you will die? Their answer was not to rush, but to build. To align life with eternity. To make every action echo beyond the grave. Standing here now, in the imagined silence of a sealed tomb, it becomes clear that these were not monuments to death. They were monuments to continuity. To the refusal to vanish. The pharaoh lies still, but they are not gone. Not really. Their voice remains in symbols. Their fears remain familiar. Their hopes remain unfinished. And as we begin to trace the path they believed awaited them, through judgment, danger, rebirth, and cosmic order, we are not just uncovering what the pharaohs knew about death. We are confronting what they understood about being human. Because the question they carved into stone still waits for an answer. What, if anything, survives us? The life of ancient Egypt unfolded along the Nile, a river so vital that it defined every aspect of existence, from planting and harvest to law, religion, and even the understanding of death itself. The people of this civilization watched the river rise and fall with a rhythm so precise that it felt like a heartbeat of the earth itself. It was predictable, nourishing, and relentless. From this pattern of seasonal floods came a profound sense of order, a cosmic harmony the Egyptians called Ma'at. They believed that all life, all creation, and even the afterlife depended on maintaining this balance. To live well, they had to understand it; to die safely, they had to honor it. Their obsession with eternity did not arise from idle fear, it emerged from the very environment that shaped their daily reality. The Nile was more than a river, it was a mirror of the universe. Each year, as its waters surged over the banks, depositing rich black soil, the Egyptians saw a cycle of death and rebirth. The barren land became fertile again, crops flourished, and life returned in abundance. This pattern was a lesson written in mud and water: death was not final. Life could emerge again, transformed yet continuous. From this simple observation, an entire theology of immortality was born. The river's rhythm became a metaphor for the human soul, a template for the journey that awaited beyond death. The same care given to the fields, the same rituals observed to ensure the river's bounty, were mirrored in the meticulous preparation for the afterlife. The living and the dead, in this worldview, were bound together by the eternal flow of the Nile. The desert surrounding the river added another layer to this obsession with permanence. While the Nile was life-giving, the desert was harsh, unyielding, and indifferent. It reminded the Egyptians daily that the world was not forgiving. Life was fragile, fleeting, and easily lost. Yet, in the vast emptiness of sand and stone, they also found clarity. The desert became a canvas upon which the cosmos revealed itself, endless skies, brilliant stars, and the harsh sun tracing paths across the horizon. These natural extremes, nourishment and barrenness, light and shadow, water and sand, shaped a culture that understood the delicate balance of existence. Survival demanded knowledge, preparation, and an acute awareness of forces beyond human control. And in contemplating these forces, they also glimpsed the possibility of survival beyond the grave. From this interplay of life and death, fear and fascination, arose a worldview in which every action mattered. Every ritual, every offering, every prayer was a response to the rhythm of the universe. The Egyptians did not merely live, they performed life as a sacred act, attuned to forces they could neither create nor destroy. Their cities, temples, and tombs were all extensions of this philosophy, physical manifestations of a culture deeply entwined with the cosmic order. The grandeur of their monuments was not mere pride or vanity. It was an assertion that life, carefully lived and ritually honored, could transcend mortality. In these constructions, the Egyptians sought not only to commemorate the living but to secure continuity beyond death. Stone became a bridge between the temporal and the eternal. In this society, death was both ordinary and extraordinary. Every person, from the peasant tending the fields to the pharaoh seated upon a gilded throne, was part of the cycle of mortality and rebirth. Yet while mortality was inevitable, the Egyptians believed immortality was attainable, through knowledge, ritual, and the preservation of memory. The living had a duty to ensure the dead could complete their journey safely, while the dead had a responsibility to maintain balance in the cosmos. Life and death were inseparable, each giving meaning to the other. In this way, the Egyptian obsession with eternity was not merely a fear of disappearance but a deep-seated desire to harmonize with the universe itself. The natural world also provided a language for the Egyptians to express their ideas about the afterlife. Sunsets and sunrises, the movement of stars across the night sky, and the growth of crops all became metaphors for the soul's journey. The sun, dying each evening only to be reborn at dawn, represented the eternal cycle of death and resurrection. The stars, constant yet unreachable, symbolized immortality and divine guidance. Rivers, deserts, and fields were more than landscapes, they were instruments of philosophy, teaching lessons about order, chaos, and the delicate balance between them. Observing these rhythms, the Egyptians developed a profound patience and a contemplative approach to life and death. They learned that permanence required preparation, attention, and reverence. Cities themselves were reflections of these beliefs. The layout of temples, the orientation of pyramids, the alignment of tombs with celestial bodies, all were carefully designed to mirror cosmic order. Every stone placed, every corridor carved, was intended to maintain Ma'at, to protect life, and to ensure a safe transition to eternity. Art and architecture became a form of storytelling that transcended time, teaching future generations about the world as it should be, not merely as it was. The living constructed eternity for the dead, and in doing so, they constructed meaning for themselves. Their obsession with permanence was ultimately a meditation on survival, not just of the body, but of identity, memory, and influence. This preoccupation with eternity also shaped social and moral life. Ethical conduct, ritual observance, and service to the gods were not abstract ideals, they were practical necessities. To disrupt Ma'at in life was to imperil one's existence in the afterlife. Justice, truth, and moral responsibility were embedded into daily activities, from trade and governance to religious offerings and personal relationships. The living were in constant dialogue with the dead, honoring them and sustaining their journey. Conversely, the dead were believed to watch, intervene, and protect the living, forming an intricate network of responsibility that bound generations together. In this way, the Egyptians understood that eternity was not only a personal goal but a communal one. Even the smallest details of life reflected this obsession. Every crop planted, every brick laid, every word spoken could echo beyond the temporal realm. Music, dance, and poetry were more than entertainment, they were rituals connecting the present to eternity. Clothing, jewelry, and cosmetics were imbued with symbolic meaning, preparing the wearer for life beyond death. In every facet of existence, Egyptians recognized the delicate thread linking the transient to the eternal. They lived with constant awareness that the physical world was a stage for cosmic forces, and that each act, however mundane, could influence survival beyond death. And yet, this profound understanding of life and death was also a source of awe. To modern eyes, the meticulous attention to order, the obsession with permanence, and the deep respect for cosmic balance can feel almost alien. But within it lies a universal truth, the desire to make sense of existence, to find meaning in mortality, and to preserve oneself against the inevitable. The Egyptians did not merely speculate about death, they engineered it. They studied the natural world, mapped its rhythms, and used that knowledge to create systems of preparation that still inspire wonder today. Their civilization was a dialogue between mortality and eternity, a conversation written in stone, river, and sky. In contemplating their world, it becomes clear that the Egyptians' obsession with eternity was not an abstract curiosity. It was a necessity born of their environment, a response to the extremes of nature, and a profound meditation on human vulnerability. The Nile taught them that life could return, that death could be navigated, and that balance was essential. The desert reminded them of fragility, impermanence, and the power of forces beyond human control. Together, these extremes shaped a culture capable of extraordinary foresight, patience, and reverence. Every temple, tomb, and artifact is a testament to this philosophy, a tangible expression of humanity's attempt to harmonize with the cosmos. Their obsession with eternity, in essence, was an attempt to escape the randomness of existence. They sought to anchor themselves, to transform fear into ritual, and to turn mortality into a carefully mapped journey. And in doing so, they left behind a world that continues to challenge, captivate, and inspire us, an invitation to consider, in our own lives, the rhythms that shape our mortality, the forces we cannot control, and the possibility of order amidst chaos. By studying their environment, their rituals, and their philosophy, we glimpse a civilization that did not simply confront death, they embraced it, understood it, and wove it into the very fabric of their world. Long before the pharaohs walked in gold and linen, before the pyramids pierced the desert sky, the story of Osiris was being told. It is a story that shaped the very foundation of ancient Egyptian belief about life, death, and the possibility of resurrection. Osiris, the god who died and returned, became the archetype for every mortal who dared to imagine life beyond the grave. His tale is not merely myth, it is a mirror of human hope, fear, and the search for meaning in the face of inevitable mortality. Through his journey, the Egyptians learned that death could be conquered, if not through brute force, then through knowledge, ritual, and divine favor. Osiris was once a king of men, a ruler who brought order and prosperity. He was wise, just, and beloved. Yet his own brother, jealous and cunning, could not tolerate his power. Set, the god of chaos, betrayed Osiris, murdering him, dismembering his body, and scattering the pieces across the land. The violence of this act reflects a profound understanding of the dangers of death. It is not always natural, it is often violent, and it can be complete. Yet even in this destruction, the myth introduces the possibility of restoration. Isis, Osiris's sister and consort, embarked on a desperate quest to retrieve his body, reassemble the pieces, and restore him to life. This act of devotion, ingenuity, and perseverance became the blueprint for the Egyptian belief in resurrection. Death could be defeated, but only with knowledge, care, and ritual. The Egyptians saw in Osiris a reflection of themselves. Just as he was torn apart and restored, so too could humans navigate the trials of death to achieve rebirth. His story was vivid and tangible, it contained danger, loss, devotion, and ultimately triumph. Each element carried symbolic weight. Set's betrayal was a reminder of chaos, the unpredictable forces that could snatch life from the unprepared. Isis's meticulous reconstruction demonstrated the importance of precision and ritual. Osiris's eventual resurrection was proof that life could endure beyond the grave, that death was not a permanent state but a passage to another form of existence. The myth was not passive storytelling, it was instruction. It offered a model of courage, patience, and hope for the living and the dead alike. Beyond the narrative, Osiris embodied profound philosophical truths. His death introduced the concept of moral accountability. In the underworld, he became the judge of the living, weighing hearts and determining who was worthy of eternity. This dual role, as both victim of death and arbiter of justice, reflects the Egyptian understanding that life and death are inseparable, that moral conduct in life has consequences in death, and that death is not simply an event but a process governed by cosmic law. To the Egyptians, Osiris's resurrection was not just miraculous, it was instructive. It taught that survival beyond death was attainable, but only through adherence to principles, preparation, and understanding. The imagery surrounding Osiris reinforced his role as the eternal king of the dead. He was depicted wrapped like a mummy, holding a crook and flail, symbols of kingship and divine authority. His green skin signified rebirth and fertility, linking him to the regenerative power of the Nile and the cycles of nature. Even in iconography, the Egyptians communicated complex philosophical ideas. The dead must be protected, guided, and sustained, just as the living must honor cosmic balance. Through repeated depiction, Osiris became more than a god, he became a template, a living guide for how mortals might approach the afterlife. Every festival, ritual, and prayer reinforced his narrative, embedding it deeply into the Egyptian consciousness. The emotional resonance of Osiris's story cannot be overstated. It is a tale of grief and longing as much as it is of power and divinity. Isis's devotion is deeply human, reflecting the pain of loss and the lengths to which love can reach. The Egyptians saw in her actions the importance of care and vigilance in the face of mortality. Similarly, the trials Osiris endured reminded them of the dangers inherent in existence, that life could be torn apart in a moment, and that chaos could disrupt even the most ordered and protected lives. Yet through all this, the myth carries a message of hope. Death is not the end, it is a transition, a challenge, and a possibility for transformation. This emotional depth made the myth compelling and enduring. It was not abstract theology but lived experience encoded in story. Osiris's influence extended far beyond myth. His resurrection shaped practical aspects of Egyptian culture, from burial practices to temple rituals. Mummification, for instance, can be seen as a physical enactment of Isis's work, a human attempt to reassemble, protect, and preserve the body in preparation for the soul's journey. The spells, amulets, and texts placed in tombs were echoes of the knowledge Isis used to restore her husband. Each act of preservation, each carefully carved inscription, was a form of participation in Osiris's triumph over death. The myth was thus inseparable from material culture. It provided meaning, guidance, and reassurance for every step taken in life and in death. The story also introduces the idea of cyclical time, a key element of Egyptian cosmology. Osiris's death and resurrection are not singular events but part of a repeating pattern, reflected in the cycles of the sun, the stars, and the Nile. Life, death, and rebirth form a continuum rather than a line. For the Egyptians, this pattern provided both comfort and structure. The natural world demonstrated that death could give rise to life, that endings could be beginnings, and that the universe operated according to principles that could be observed, understood, and respected. Osiris became the living embodiment of this principle, a god who had conquered the chaos of death and offered a map for others to follow. In the emotional landscape of the Egyptians, Osiris represented the profound desire to overcome impermanence. Humans feared oblivion, the loss of self, and the erasure of memory. Osiris promised that such fears could be managed, that with preparation, knowledge, and divine favor, survival beyond death was possible. His story was simultaneously cautionary and reassuring, filled with peril yet infused with hope. It encouraged reflection, to live well, to act rightly, to prepare for the inevitable, and to trust that life might continue in some form, even after the body had succumbed to decay. Through Osiris, death became a challenge rather than a tragedy, a landscape to navigate rather than a wall to crash against. Ultimately, the myth of Osiris is more than a religious narrative, it is a meditation on human existence. It confronts the fragility of life, the certainty of mortality, and the desire for continuity. It teaches that knowledge and preparation are the only tools against the chaos of death, and that devotion, both to the divine and to the principles of order, can transform fear into agency. The story is a bridge between human vulnerability and divine wisdom, offering both guidance and comfort. In Osiris, the Egyptians found not only a god but a teacher, a mirror of themselves, and a promise that the mysteries of death were not insurmountable. Through the story of Osiris, we begin to understand the emotional and philosophical foundation of Egyptian afterlife beliefs. It was a civilization that did not shy away from death but confronted it directly, imagining both the dangers and the triumphs that lay beyond the mortal world. Osiris became the compass for a culture obsessed with eternity, teaching them that the soul's survival was possible, that chaos could be navigated, and that life, and death, was part of a larger, ordered cycle. For every pharaoh preparing their tomb, every scribe copying the Book of the Dead, every family performing rituals for their departed, the myth was a guiding force, a story that transformed fear into understanding, despair into hope, and the inevitability of death into the possibility of resurrection. In standing before the tombs, imagining the trials of the underworld, and picturing the meticulous care with which bodies and souls were preserved, one cannot escape the emotional power of Osiris's tale. It is a story that continues to resonate because it addresses something universal, the tension between mortality and desire for continuity, between chaos and order, between loss and hope. Osiris taught the Egyptians that death is not a boundary but a journey, and that within this journey, courage, knowledge, and devotion can transform the inevitable into something eternal. In this understanding, the pharaohs were not merely rulers, they were participants in a cosmic drama whose script had been written long before their birth, a drama that promised that death could be endured, understood, and ultimately, transcended. The pharaoh was unlike any ruler the world has known, a living god walking among mortals, the embodiment of both earthly power and divine will. To the people of ancient Egypt, the king was more than a leader, he was the axis upon which the cosmos turned. Every law he enacted, every festival he presided over, every ritual he performed was believed to uphold the balance of the universe. The pharaoh's authority extended far beyond the political realm, it was spiritual, cosmic, and eternal. He was simultaneously human and divine, a bridge between life and the afterlife, the known world and the mysteries beyond. This duality defined not only his reign but the very structure of Egyptian society and its relationship to death. From the moment of birth, a pharaoh was marked by destiny. Their lives were carefully orchestrated, observed, and protected, not merely for their survival but for the survival of the world. Every ceremonial act, every gesture of governance, was a ritual maintaining Ma'at, the delicate balance of order and justice that governed both the heavens and the earth. The Egyptians believed that if the pharaoh faltered, the entire cosmos could fall into chaos. Crops might fail, floods might become destructive, the sun might falter in its journey across the sky. Death, then, was not just personal, it was a potential catastrophe. And so, preparing the pharaoh for the afterlife was not optional, it was essential for the continued harmony of existence. The pharaoh's divinity was expressed in both symbolism and action. Crowns, scepters, ceremonial beards, and intricate regalia were not mere decoration, they were imbued with meaning, asserting authority over life and death. In statues and reliefs, the pharaoh was often depicted larger than other figures, emphasizing both his power and his connection to the gods. His likeness appeared not only in temples and palaces but in tombs, ensuring that even in death, his presence could guide, protect, and influence the world. To the Egyptians, divinity was performative, it had to be enacted through ritual, visible to the people, and recognizable to the gods. This performance continued even in the afterlife, where the pharaoh's resurrection ensured the continued maintenance of cosmic order. Death for a pharaoh was both inevitable and transformative. Unlike ordinary mortals, whose lives ended with uncertainty, the pharaoh's death was a carefully mapped journey. From the moment the king approached the end of life, every act, every prayer, every offering, every spell, was designed to secure his passage into eternity. Tombs were prepared long before death arrived, filled with treasures, tools, and sacred texts, each item carefully chosen to sustain the king in the next world. Mummification was performed with precision, turning the body into a vessel capable of enduring beyond time. The pharaoh's divinity did not vanish at death, it intensified. The king became both ruler of the living and judge of the dead, a figure whose power now extended fully into the spiritual realm. This intertwining of mortality and divinity created a profound psychological tension. The pharaoh was mortal, vulnerable to sickness, aging, and violence, yet he was also eternal, invested with powers beyond comprehension. Preparing for death was not merely practical, it was existential. Every ritual, every offering, every invocation was a step toward securing not just survival but ultimate authority over death itself. The Egyptians understood that a pharaoh who failed in this preparation risked more than oblivion, he risked the collapse of order itself. This fear imbued every act of kingship with urgency and weight, transforming political life into a sacred duty and personal destiny into a cosmic responsibility. The pharaoh's relationship to the gods was equally complex. He was both their representative on earth and their partner in maintaining the universe. Rituals were performed not only to honor the gods but to align the pharaoh's will with divine intention. Festivals celebrated the cycles of the sun, the Nile, and the seasons, each reflecting the king's role as a mediator between mortal and celestial realms. When the pharaoh passed into death, these connections were not severed, they were reinforced. The king's resurrection mirrored the sun's daily rebirth and the annual renewal of the Nile's fertility. In essence, the pharaoh became a living embodiment of the universe's regenerative power, ensuring that life, order, and balance would continue beyond his mortal existence. Even the pharaoh's tombs reflect this philosophy. The grandeur of the pyramids, the hidden chambers of the Valley of the Kings, the intricate decorations and inscriptions, every detail was designed to facilitate resurrection and maintain authority in the afterlife. The layout of these tombs was not arbitrary, it followed precise spiritual and cosmological principles. Chambers were aligned with stars, corridors traced the paths of celestial bodies, and inscriptions recited spells to guide and protect the king's soul. Tombs were therefore not merely resting places, they were theaters of cosmic order, stages upon which the drama of life, death, and resurrection was enacted. The pharaoh's divinity was immortalized in stone, ensuring that even as time eroded civilizations, the king's influence would endure. The preparation for death also extended to the pharaoh's entourage and subjects. Priests, artisans, and scribes played critical roles in ensuring the king's immortality. Their labor was not merely service, it was participation in a sacred process that upheld both social and cosmic order. Temples produced ritual objects, tombs were built with precision, and spells were copied and repeated to perfection. Every act reinforced the pharaoh's transition from mortal to eternal ruler, and in doing so, maintained the delicate balance between the living, the dead, and the divine. The king's death was never solitary, it was a communal event, involving the careful orchestration of countless individuals whose devotion ensured the survival of cosmic harmony. Emotionally, the pharaoh's role was fraught with paradox. He was revered and adored, yet burdened by responsibilities no ordinary person could comprehend. The weight of eternity rested on his shoulders. His life was lived in the knowledge that every action had significance beyond immediate perception, that failure could have consequences not only for himself but for the world. This understanding infused kingship with gravitas and urgency, creating a unique psychological landscape in which devotion, fear, and hope were inseparable. To the Egyptians, the pharaoh was a model of what humanity might achieve when aligned with divine order, a living demonstration that mortality and eternity could coexist in a single life. Ultimately, the pharaoh's divinity transformed death into both a personal and universal event. It was personal because it defined the king's soul, ensured his survival, and preserved his identity. It was universal because it maintained balance in the cosmos, secured the cycles of nature, and guaranteed the continuation of life itself. In preparing for death, the pharaoh embodied the Egyptians' deepest fears, hopes, and philosophical insights. He became a living testament to the idea that mortality could be navigated, that the transition to the afterlife could be mastered, and that human life, when aligned with divine principles, could resonate across eternity. Through the lens of the pharaoh, one begins to understand the essence of ancient Egyptian culture, a civilization in which life was inseparable from death, where political authority and divine duty were intertwined, and where mortality was transformed into a journey of cosmic significance. The pharaoh's death was never an end, it was a bridge, a passage, and a performance that reaffirmed the order of the universe. His existence, both living and eternal, demonstrates the profound psychological, spiritual, and philosophical depths of a civilization obsessed with balance, immortality, and the sacred weight of life and death. By studying the pharaoh, we glimpse a culture that approached mortality not with fear alone, but with preparation, reverence, and the certainty that life, order, and divinity were eternally entwined. Death, in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, was never a simple event. It was a process, a profound transformation, a fracture in the self that demanded careful navigation. Unlike our modern understanding, where the body ceases and the mind fades, the Egyptians saw existence as composed of multiple, interdependent layers. Each person was not a singular being but a collection of vital forces, each with its own role in maintaining life, identity, and continuity beyond the grave. The moment of death, therefore, was not the end, it was the splitting of the self into distinct components, each embarking on its own journey through the cosmos, yet all tied together by the fragile threads of preparation, ritual, and memory. To die was to confront the most intimate and terrifying question imaginable: could one remain whole in the face of oblivion? Central to this understanding were the concepts of Ka, Ba, Ak, Run, and Shut. Each of these was more than a philosophical abstraction, they were living, functional parts of a person's existence. The Ka represented the vital essence, the life force that animated the body and survived beyond its decay. It was nourished by offerings, sustained by ritual, and intrinsically tied to the physical form. The Ba, in contrast, was the soul's personality, its mobility, its ability to travel between worlds. It was often depicted as a bird with a human head, capable of leaving the tomb yet returning to it, bridging the living and the dead. The Ak was the transfigured, luminous form that emerged when death was successfully navigated, a state of effectiveness and eternal presence. The Run was the name itself, a magical entity whose utterance ensured remembrance and survival, while the Shut, or shadow, represented the omnipresent aspect of a person, inseparable from the body and spirit. To lose any of these components was to risk dissolution. Death was dangerous not because the body stopped beating, but because the self could unravel. The Egyptians understood, with profound psychological insight, that mortality is more than a biological cessation, it is a test of continuity, memory, and integrity. The fear was not of suffering but of erasure, of ceasing to exist in any recognizable form. A heart weighed down by sin, a body desecrated, a name forgotten by the living, each threatened the survival of these essential components. In this context, death became an event demanding meticulous attention, careful preparation, and deep understanding. It was a journey of both the body and the soul, each step laden with risk and potential transformation. The process of dying was envisioned as a gradual unbinding, a fracturing that required guidance. The Ka, tied to the physical body, needed sustenance. This is why offerings, food, drink, and ritual objects were so critical in tombs. They were not mere symbols but practical nourishment for the life force. The Ba required the ability to traverse both the living world and the underworld, to communicate and navigate, to confront dangers and return to the tomb. Without proper guidance, without spells, amulets, and knowledge, the Ba could wander aimlessly, lost in the void, unable to reintegrate with the Akh. This intricate system reveals a civilization that understood the fragility of identity and the complex interplay between physical, spiritual, and social dimensions of existence. What is remarkable is how these beliefs informed not only ritual but the very psychology of life. Knowing that death was a fracturing, the Egyptians approached their existence with a consciousness that modern life rarely demands. Ethics, moral responsibility, and social conduct were inseparable from preparation for the beyond. Every act, every word, every intention was observed and recorded, both symbolically and ritually, to ensure that the components of the self remained intact. The fear of disruption, of fracturing beyond repair, was not abstract. It was a tangible, daily awareness that permeated art, architecture, law, and personal practice. Life was training, rehearsal, and meditation for the ultimate passage. The Egyptians also understood that death was a journey, not a moment. The soul had to pass through the duat, the mysterious and perilous underworld, confronting both divine and monstrous forces. Each component of the self had its role to play. The Ka required offerings, the Ba needed guidance, the Akh required successful transformation. Failure at any stage meant incomplete survival. This is why funerary texts, spells, and magical inscriptions were so elaborate. They were roadmaps, survival guides, and insurance policies for the soul. They codified what could otherwise be chaos, offering structure and direction for what was otherwise the ultimate unknown. Emotionally, this framework reflects a profound understanding of human anxiety. The Egyptians did not shy away from the terror of death. They mapped it, articulated it, and prepared for it. The fear of losing one's identity, of vanishing entirely, is a fear that resonates across millennia. Yet the Egyptians paired this fear with hope that preparation, devotion, and knowledge could secure continuity. Death was simultaneously frightening and navigable, perilous yet conquerable. This duality created a rich emotional landscape, where reverence, awe, anxiety, and aspiration existed together. The Egyptians did not seek to deny death, they sought mastery over it, recognizing that survival beyond the mortal realm was contingent upon understanding its mechanisms. The splitting of the self also illuminates the social dimension of Egyptian death practices. Preservation of identity was not an isolated endeavor, it required the participation of family, priests, artisans, and the community. Rituals, offerings, and recitations were acts of collective responsibility. Tombs were not just personal, they were nodes of interaction between the living and the dead, sites where the community ensured the survival of each individual. The failure of memory, the loss of ritual, the neglect of offerings, these were dangers as real as decay or disease, threatening the cohesion of the soul. In this sense, death was a communal enterprise, a network of obligations and care, reflecting a society acutely aware of interdependence and the fragile web connecting life and eternity. The concept of self-fracturing also extends into the moral philosophy of the Egyptians. Each component of the soul was not merely functional but evaluative. The heart, representing moral and emotional integrity, would eventually face judgment. A Ka unprepared, a Ba wandering aimlessly, a Ren forgotten, all these reflected the ethical dimensions of living. Survival was contingent not only on physical preservation but on living rightly, maintaining balance, and honoring Ma'at. The Egyptians encoded moral responsibility into metaphysics, linking ethical conduct directly to survival beyond death. This sophisticated intertwining of morality, spirituality, and psychology reveals a civilization deeply attuned to the stakes of existence and the enduring consequences of action. In confronting the moment of death, the Egyptians acknowledged its inevitability while simultaneously exercising agency over it. They recognized that mortality was not optional, but mastery of its consequences was achievable. Through ritual, magic, preparation, and devotion, the self could remain intact, unified, and eternal. This is the radical insight at the heart of Egyptian death practices. Death is not an annihilating force but a landscape to navigate. It is fracturing, perilous, and uncertain, but also structured, intelligible, and ultimately conquerable. Their worldview transforms the act of dying into an art, a science, and a moral endeavor, merging fear and hope, ritual and psychology, mortality and eternity into a single coherent philosophy. In reflecting upon this, one begins to see why the Egyptians were obsessed with preparation, ritual, and knowledge. They were not merely concerned with what happened after death, they were profoundly aware of the mechanics of existence itself. Each individual, each component of the self, required attention. Each act in life, each spell in a tomb, each recitation of a name contributed to the preservation of identity beyond the mortal realm. Death was not a singular moment but a process of testing, separation, and reintegration. To survive it was to demonstrate mastery over the most fundamental fear of humanity, the loss of self. The moment of death, then, was simultaneously terrifying and awe-inspiring. It was a confrontation with the limits of existence, the fragility of identity, and the complexity of eternity. And yet, within this confrontation lay profound possibility. For those who understood the process, who honored the components of the self and navigated the journey successfully, death became a doorway rather than a wall. The Ka, Ba, Ak, Run, and Shut could be preserved, harmonized, and ultimately reunited, ensuring continuity in a realm beyond comprehension. In this understanding, the Egyptians transformed mortality into a disciplined, sacred journey, where fear, preparation, and knowledge converged to create the possibility of transcendence and enduring existence. In the world of ancient Egypt, the body was not merely flesh and bone, it was the anchor for the soul, the vessel through which life could continue beyond death. To the Egyptians, preserving the physical form was not a matter of vanity, it was a spiritual imperative. Without the body, the Ka, that vital life force, could not remain tethered to the world. Without it, the journey through the underworld would be perilous, the soul adrift and vulnerable. Mummification, therefore, was less ritual than technology, a carefully engineered process designed to sustain identity, memory, and continuity in the face of mortality. Every incision, every resin, every fold of linen was part of a system that transformed death into survival. The process began almost immediately after death. Embalmers worked quickly to halt decomposition, recognizing that the decay of flesh threatened the very essence of the deceased. The first step involved the removal of internal organs, each treated with reverence and care. The heart, considered the seat of morality and intellect, was often preserved or at least accounted for, as it would face judgment in the afterlife. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were carefully embalmed and stored in canopic jars, each guarded by a protective deity. The meticulous handling of organs reflects an understanding that the self was composite, and that every part of the body played a role in sustaining the soul beyond death. To neglect even one organ was to risk fracturing the individual's identity and jeopardizing the Ka's survival. Next came desiccation. The body was treated with natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salts, which drew moisture from the flesh, halting decay and preparing it for long-term preservation. This step could take weeks, during which the body was carefully monitored, positioned, and protected. The Egyptians understood that time and patience were essential. Mummification was not merely a procedure but a prolonged ritual of attention and care. Every detail mattered, the positioning of limbs, the alignment of the spine, the removal of moisture, because the success of the process would determine the soul's ability to reunite and navigate the afterlife. In this act of preservation, science and spirituality were inseparable. The Egyptians were, in essence, early bioengineers, applying empirical knowledge in service of metaphysical goals. Once the body was dried and cleansed, it was anointed with oils and resins, substances that both protected and sanctified the flesh. Aromatic compounds were chosen not only for their preservative qualities but for their symbolic meaning. Frankincense, myrrh, and other resins were believed to carry spiritual potency, guarding the deceased against corruption and malevolent forces. The use of these substances highlights the Egyptians' belief that preservation was as much spiritual as it was physical. Death was a battlefield, and the embalmed body was a fortress. It was fortified, protected, and prepared to endure both decay and the metaphysical challenges of the Duat, the underworld. The final stage was wrapping, a labor-intensive process that transformed the body into the iconic mummy. Long strips of linen were carefully applied, each layer interwoven with amulets, spells, and charms. These were not decorative, they were functional. Amulets of scarabs, eyes of Horus, and other sacred symbols were placed strategically to protect the body and the soul, ensuring safe passage through the underworld. The wrappings themselves served multiple purposes. They maintained the body's shape, reinforced its integrity, and created a sacred cocoon linking the physical and spiritual realms. The act of wrapping was almost meditative, a slow, deliberate choreography in which every fold carried meaning and purpose. In essence, the mummification process was a form of ritualized engineering, a blend of art, science, and devotion aimed at achieving eternity. Throughout this process, the embalmer's role was both technical and spiritual. These individuals were highly trained, often priests or ritual specialists who understood both anatomy and the metaphysical imperatives of the task. Their hands were guided by centuries of accumulated knowledge, their actions informed by sacred texts and practical observation. The embalmer's work was a form of collaboration between the living and the dead, a partnership in which human skill ensured that divine promises could be fulfilled. Mistakes were catastrophic. A misaligned organ, an improperly applied resin, or a misplaced amulet could imperil the deceased's journey and disrupt the delicate balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order. The architecture of tombs complemented the preservation of the body. Chambers were designed to protect the mummy from the elements, thieves, and spiritual hazards. Walls were decorated with spells, illustrations of the journey through the underworld, and images of gods who would guide and protect the deceased. The tomb itself became an extension of the mummification process, a secure, sacred environment that reinforced the durability of the body and the ka. Together, body and tomb formed a system engineered for continuity, a fortress of flesh, stone, and magic that defied time. Mummification was not reserved for kings alone. While pharaohs received the most elaborate preparations, nobles and even commoners adopted scaled versions of these practices, reflecting a society-wide understanding that the body was essential to survival beyond death. In every social stratum, preservation signaled care, foresight, and respect for the continuity of the self. Even animals were mummified, often pets or sacred creatures, demonstrating the belief that life's essence could extend into eternity through deliberate care and ritual action. The practice of embalming, therefore, was both universal and profoundly human, a recognition that mortality could be mitigated through knowledge, attention, and sacred labor. The philosophical implications of mummification are equally striking. By transforming the body into a vessel capable of enduring time, the Egyptians expressed their refusal to surrender to oblivion. They understood that survival required material and spiritual preparation, that immortality was not accidental but constructed. Death was not simply endured, it was negotiated, engineered, and choreographed. In preserving the body, the Egyptians were asserting control over the most uncontrollable of human experiences, creating a bridge between the temporal and the eternal. Even today, thousands of years later, the preservation of mummies continues to inspire awe. Modern science can marvel at their technique, but the ancient Egyptians' vision extended beyond mere mechanics. Every cut, every resin, every fold of linen was infused with intention, knowledge, and reverence. They were performing an act that transcended time, turning mortality into a carefully mapped journey, a process in which the physical body, the spiritual self, and cosmic order were inseparably intertwined. Ultimately, mummification reveals the Egyptians' extraordinary understanding of death as both biological and metaphysical. It was a technology of the soul, a method for maintaining identity, memory, and essence beyond the decay of flesh. The preserved body was a vessel, a safeguard, and a sacred instrument ensuring the continuation of life in another realm. In this way, they transformed mortality from a simple ending into a structured, deliberate, and purposeful transition. Death was not the cessation of existence, it was a complex, navigable process, one that required knowledge, precision, and devotion. Through mummification, the Egyptians taught a profound lesson, that life and death are inseparable, that the material and spiritual realms are intertwined, and that survival beyond the grave is possible when preparation is deliberate, meticulous, and infused with intention. The body was not discarded, nor was it trivial, it was sacred. By preserving it, the Egyptians preserved identity, memory, and the possibility of eternity. Their remarkable process reminds us that death is not merely a conclusion, but a continuation, a carefully constructed journey in which the living can act to secure the endurance of the soul across time and space. In the quiet, dimly lit chambers of Egyptian tombs, the mummy lay wrapped and sealed, yet it was far from alone. Every fold of linen, every resin coating, every careful placement of amulet and charm carried an invisible network of protection, guidance, and intention. These objects were not mere decoration, they were active participants in the soul's survival, part of a carefully orchestrated system that bridged the physical and spiritual worlds. The Egyptians understood that death was a battlefield, a realm fraught with uncertainty, danger, and judgment. Words, symbols, and objects were their weapons, their shields, and their maps, each chosen to ensure that the deceased could navigate the perilous journey beyond life. Amulets were central to this protective network. Scarabs, representing rebirth and transformation, were often placed over the heart to guard the moral and emotional center of the individual. Eyes of Horus, tiny in scale but monumental in significance, were positioned to ward off malevolent forces, offering vision and protection in realms where the living eye could not see. Other charms represented gods, animals, and cosmic forces, each one acting as a spiritual ally for the deceased. The careful placement of these objects was guided by both tradition and magical principle. Every amulet had a specific function, a precise location, and a carefully intended purpose. The Egyptians believed that the proper combination and arrangement could safeguard the soul, maintain balance, and even empower it to act in the afterlife. Language itself was a powerful tool. Spells, prayers, and inscriptions were not symbolic, they were functional, activating protections and commanding cosmic forces. The words were carefully chosen, often repeated verbatim, because utterance had power. In a culture where oral and written communication were inseparable from magic, speaking the right name or phrase could influence reality itself. This is why tombs were filled with hieroglyphic texts, etched into walls or written on papyrus. Each line of text was a thread connecting the living and the dead, a lifeline to ensure that the components of the soul, Ka, Ba, Ak, Run, and Shut, remained intact. The Egyptians believed that forgetting, mispronouncing, or omitting these words could imperil the deceased, leaving them vulnerable to disintegration or malevolent forces. The linen wrappings of the mummy were themselves imbued with significance. They were not passive coverings but active conduits of protection. Each layer was applied in a deliberate pattern, sometimes enclosing amulets, sometimes forming magical knots believed to trap or repel evil. Wrapping was a meditative, ritualized act that reflected the Egyptians' understanding of the interconnectedness of body, soul, and cosmos. The process created a physical and symbolic barrier, reinforcing the mummy as a sacred vessel. In this way, the linen became both armor and ritual, blending practical preservation with metaphysical significance. Spoken magic complemented these physical preparations. Priests and ritual specialists recited incantations during the embalming process and at burial, invoking gods, guiding the Ka and Ba, and ensuring that the deceased would survive trials in the underworld. These words were considered alive, carrying energy that could act upon the soul. Magic was not superstition, it was a structured, codified system of action that intersected with belief, psychology, and the metaphysical understanding of existence. The Egyptians recognized that survival beyond death required more than physical preservation, it demanded the orchestration of spiritual forces, mediated through language, ritual, and intention. The combination of linen, amulets, and spoken magic created a holistic system in which the physical, symbolic, and spiritual dimensions worked together seamlessly. The mummy was both object and agent, body and talisman, passive vessel and active participant. This integration demonstrates the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of how material culture, symbolic systems, and spiritual practice could intersect to achieve practical and philosophical goals. The preservation of life beyond death required attention to every detail, from the chemical properties of resins to the exact placement of hieroglyphs, from the selection of amulets to the rhythm and cadence of spoken spells. In this intricate interplay, the living and the dead collaborated across time and space to ensure continuity, balance, and survival. The Egyptians also understood the social and communal dimension of these practices. Tombs were constructed, adorned, and maintained not only for kings and nobles but for their families and communities. The placement of amulets, the recitation of spells, and the provision of offerings involved priests, artisans, and loved ones. The process of safeguarding the dead was a shared responsibility, reflecting a worldview in which life and death were inseparable, and survival beyond the grave required cooperation, knowledge, and dedication. The rituals performed around the mummy, the spells recited, and the objects placed were acts of both devotion and duty, reinforcing social cohesion while maintaining cosmic balance. Even the smallest details were significant. A tiny figure of a servant or a carefully shaped amulet could make the difference between safe passage and peril. The Egyptians believed that nothing in the tomb was accidental, every element was intentional, each contributing to the survival and empowerment of the deceased. These items acted as guides, protectors, and helpers, supplementing the soul's abilities in realms where human faculties alone could not suffice. The dead were not abandoned, they were equipped, fortified, and taught to navigate a world of gods, monsters, and cosmic law. Emotionally, this practice reflects a profound sensitivity to the vulnerability of existence. The Egyptians understood that death was frightening precisely because it threatened the integrity of identity, the continuity of memory, and the cohesion of the self. In response, they created tangible, functional measures to guard against these threats. Mummies were cocooned in ritual and meaning, surrounded by instruments, objects, and words that ensured survival. The act of wrapping, of placing charms, of reciting spells was itself an expression of love, care, and devotion, a way for the living to reach across the threshold of mortality and sustain those who had passed. In every fold of linen and every word spoken, the Egyptians wove hope into the fabric of eternity. The combination of physical protection, symbolic action, and magical language illustrates the Egyptians' holistic understanding of the human condition. They recognized that existence encompasses body, mind, soul, and social connection, and that each dimension must be preserved to achieve continuity. The mummy was thus not a static relic, it was a dynamic interface between worlds, a carefully engineered system designed to maintain integrity, identity, and power across time and space. In this sense, mummification and its associated rituals were both science and art, practical technology and spiritual philosophy, grounded in observation, experimentation, and profound insight into the fragility of life. Through these practices, the Egyptians expressed a fundamental truth: survival beyond death is neither automatic nor guaranteed. It requires preparation, skill, knowledge, and devotion. It demands attention to detail, mastery of ritual, and a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of body, soul, and cosmos. Linen, amulets, and spoken magic were not incidental, they were essential, forming a triad of protection, guidance, and empowerment that enabled the deceased to navigate the unknown. In their care, the Egyptians acknowledged both the terror and the possibility inherent in death, crafting systems that allowed hope to endure alongside fear. Ultimately, these practices reveal a civilization that treated mortality with seriousness, precision, and reverence. The mummy, wrapped in layers of linen, encased with charms, and accompanied by the spoken word, stands as a testament to human ingenuity, devotion, and insight. It is a physical manifestation of the desire to endure, to preserve identity, and to navigate the mysteries of the afterlife. Through these rituals, the Egyptians transformed death from a mere ending into a carefully managed journey, one in which preparation, magic, and devotion ensured that the soul could continue, intact, beyond the reach of time, decay, and chaos. The afterlife of the ancient Egyptians was not a vague or abstract concept, it was a meticulously mapped realm with rules, dangers, and rewards, a cosmic landscape through which the soul had to travel with skill, knowledge, and courage. This journey, known as the voyage through the Duat, was perilous and intricate, filled with challenges that tested every aspect of the deceased's being, physical, spiritual, and moral. The Egyptians imagined the Duat as both a place and a process, a liminal space where mortality ended and eternity began. It was not simply a destination but a passage, one that demanded preparation, precision, and unwavering attention to the instructions left behind in texts, amulets, and rituals. The Duat was envisioned as a vast, complex underworld, a realm of rivers, gates, guardians, and cosmic forces. It was a reflection of the universe's order, a microcosm of life's challenges projected into the afterlife. Rivers of fire and water might threaten to consume the unwary, while serpents, demons, and other supernatural creatures tested courage, morality, and wisdom. The landscape was not random, it was structured according to principles that mirrored the natural and divine order observed in life. The sun's nightly journey through the underworld provided a blueprint, demonstrating that even in darkness, there was a path, a rhythm, and a possibility of renewal. The deceased, like the sun, had to navigate these cycles carefully, overcoming obstacles to emerge reborn into eternal life. Knowledge was essential. The Egyptian dead could not rely solely on divine favor, they had to remember spells, recite the correct names, and act in accordance with cosmic laws. Texts like the Book of the Dead were not mere literature, they were practical guides, survival manuals for eternity. Each illustration, each passage, provided instructions for dealing with gates, guardians, and trials. The deceased needed to know how to appease gods, recognize dangers, and deploy magical knowledge to continue. Forgetfulness was a serious threat, even minor errors could result in loss, disintegration, or inability to reunite the components of the self. The emphasis on knowledge reflects a sophisticated understanding of mortality as a process that requires preparation, memory, and skill. Judgment was central to this journey. At its core was the weighing of the heart, a ritual in which the deceased's moral and ethical conduct was measured against Ma'at, the principle of balance, justice, and cosmic order. The heart, containing the sum of a person's actions, was placed upon scales and weighed against the feather of truth. A heart heavy with sin, deceit, or imbalance could not pass, it was devoured by Ammit, the devourer, and the soul would be annihilated. This was the ultimate terror, not punishment in fire or torture, but the complete cessation of existence. Conversely, a heart in balance allowed the deceased to move forward, integrating the Ka and Ba into the Ak, achieving effectiveness and eternal presence. The process underscores the Egyptians' deep moral awareness. Survival beyond death was inseparable from righteous living, ethical conduct, and alignment with cosmic principles. The journey was not solely perilous, it was also transformative. Each obstacle, each guardian, each challenge had a purpose, to test the preparedness, courage, and wisdom of the soul. The deceased was not passive but active, required to engage with the forces of the afterlife, demonstrate mastery over fear, and apply the knowledge provided through texts and rituals. This interaction reveals an Egyptian understanding of death as an active process, not a static state. Survival demanded agency, preparation, and skill. The journey through the Duat, in this sense, mirrors the challenges of life itself, translating the principles of order, balance, and knowledge into the metaphysical realm. Visualizations of this journey, carved and painted in tombs and papyri, offer profound insight into the Egyptian mindset. Gates lined with serpents, lakes of fire, and monsters with heads of crocodiles, lions, and hippopotamuses create a sense of awe and terror. Yet these depictions were not intended merely to frighten, they were educational, guiding the deceased in how to act, what to recite, and which offerings to deploy. Illustrations of Osiris, the god-judge, provide reassurance. Those who follow the prescribed path, who act wisely and justly, can reach eternal life. The imagery reinforces the duality of the journey, danger and hope, fear and possibility coexist, shaping an understanding of mortality as both terrifying and conquerable. Amulets, spells, and inscriptions continued to play a crucial role in navigating the Duat. Scarabs symbolized rebirth, eyes of Horus offered protection and perception, and carefully placed charms provided assistance against malevolent forces. These objects were not symbolic alone, they were functional, activating protections and empowering the soul to act in realms beyond human perception. The interplay between physical objects and spiritual guidance demonstrates the Egyptians' sophisticated approach to death. It was both practical and metaphysical, requiring tools, knowledge, and understanding to survive and thrive. Time in the Duat was cyclical, echoing natural and cosmic rhythms. The sun's nightly journey through the underworld, culminating in its rebirth at dawn, mirrored the soul's potential journey, descent, challenge, and transformation. The Egyptians did not view death linearly. It was a cycle, an opportunity for renewal, and a continuation of existence. This cyclical perspective created a profound sense of hope, framing mortality not as an end but as a series of challenges to be mastered. It also reinforced the importance of preparation and knowledge. Just as the sun navigates the darkness each night, the deceased must navigate the perils of the afterlife with skill and precision. Emotionally, the journey through the Duat reflects a deep understanding of fear, uncertainty, and hope. The Egyptians acknowledged the terror of death while offering a structured path through it. This path required courage, morality, and knowledge, transforming fear into purposeful action. The deceased, like the living, could exercise agency, making choices, reciting the proper spells, and using their preparation to survive and thrive. Death was not passive, it was a test of all that had been learned in life, a final reflection of the care, knowledge, and moral conduct cultivated during existence. Community and ritual were also central to success in the Duat. The living continued to play a role through offerings, prayers, and maintenance of tombs. The deceased were not isolated, they relied on the ongoing devotion of family and priests to reinforce their protection, provide sustenance, and support their journey. In this way, death was a communal endeavor, linking generations and ensuring continuity across time. The journey of one soul became embedded within a network of relationships, obligations, and cosmic responsibilities. Ultimately, the voyage through the Duat exemplifies the Egyptians' comprehensive approach to mortality. It integrates the physical, spiritual, ethical, and communal dimensions of existence, creating a multidimensional system for survival beyond death. The journey is perilous yet navigable, frightening yet full of hope, structured yet filled with possibilities. It transforms mortality from a static event into an active, participatory process, demanding preparation, skill, and courage. Through understanding, ritual, and devotion, the deceased could traverse the underworld, confront judgment, and emerge as an Ankh, effective, luminous, and eternal. The journey through the Duat, with its trials, judgments, and transformations, reveals a civilization deeply attuned to the nature of existence and mortality. The Egyptians recognized that death was both terrifying and conquerable, chaotic and ordered, destructive and regenerative. By mapping the afterlife in such detail, they provided not only a guide for survival but a philosophical reflection on life itself, that courage, knowledge, morality, and preparation are essential in navigating both the seen and unseen realms. Their vision of the afterlife was a testament to human ingenuity, faith, and the desire for continuity beyond the limits of mortal existence, offering a profound meditation on what it means to endure, transform, and ultimately survive. The culmination of the Egyptian soul's journey rested upon a moment both terrifying and extraordinary, the weighing of the heart. This was not a ceremonial gesture but the apex of cosmic justice, a judgment that would determine whether the deceased could move beyond the perilous realms of the Duat into eternal life. The Egyptians understood that death was not merely a physical transition, it was a moral and spiritual reckoning. The heart, representing the essence of a person's thoughts, actions, and intentions, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the divine embodiment of truth, balance, and cosmic order. In this delicate scale, the entirety of a life was measured, distilled into a single moment that decided the fate of the soul. The scene itself, as depicted in tomb illustrations and funerary texts, is vivid and solemn. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and protector of the dead, presides over the scales, carefully adjusting and observing the balance. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, records the results, inscribing the verdict with meticulous care. Across from the scales, Ammit, the devourer, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, waits patiently, embodying the terrifying consequence of failure, obliteration. The image is both awe-inspiring and frightening. The deceased stands before forces far beyond human comprehension, their life distilled into weight and measure, their morality made tangible. The Egyptians, in envisioning this ritual, understood that the stakes of existence extend beyond the mortal realm, that life's decisions resonate across eternity. Every action in life mattered because it affected the heart. Honesty, fairness, devotion, and adherence to Ma'at ensured a light, balanced heart capable of passing judgment. Conversely, deceit, cruelty, and disregard for cosmic order risked tipping the scales unfavorably. The Egyptians perceived morality not as an abstract ideal but as a functional necessity for survival beyond death. Ethical living, in this framework, was inseparable from metaphysical preservation. Life was thus a rehearsal for eternity, a continuous practice in integrity and balance, where every choice carried consequences not only for the living but for the afterlife. The weighing of the heart transformed morality into a tangible, unavoidable reality. The psychological implications of this judgment are profound. Imagine standing before a cosmic scale, your very essence weighed against absolute truth, your survival contingent upon the purity of your intentions and actions. This awareness imbued daily life with gravity, encouraging reflection, responsibility, and mindfulness. The Egyptians internalized a worldview in which ethical conduct, preparation for death, and alignment with cosmic law were inseparable. Life and death were continuous, interdependent, and morally charged. The heart was not only a biological organ but a repository of memory, emotion, and accountability, linking the temporal actions of the living to the eternal consequences of the soul. Preparation for this judgment began long before death. Spells, ritual texts, and funerary inscriptions guided the deceased, providing the knowledge necessary to navigate challenges, protect the Ka and Ba, and present themselves favorably in the presence of the gods. The Book of the Dead, in particular, served as a manual for ethical and ritual survival. It contained hymns, instructions, and declarations of innocence, enabling the deceased to assert their adherence to Ma'at. These texts demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Fear of annihilation is mitigated by knowledge, guidance, and preparation, allowing the individual to engage actively with their fate rather than confront it passively. The components of the soul, Ka, Ba, Ak, Run, and Shut, were all implicated in this judgment. The Ka, tied to the body, ensured that offerings and sustenance could be received. The Ba, capable of movement, guided the individual through the Duat. The Ak, the luminous transformed self, emerged only if the heart passed the test. Even the Run, the name, carried power. It had to be remembered, spoken, and inscribed to maintain continuity. Together, these elements formed a complex system of identity that depended on preparation, moral conduct, and cosmic alignment. The weighing of the heart was the ultimate convergence of these forces, a moment where ethics, ritual, and metaphysics intersected to determine survival. Emotionally, the scene is layered with tension, awe, and hope. The Egyptians understood that fear motivates preparation, that anxiety about death can inspire careful living and devotion. Yet they also infused the ritual with optimism. Guidance, ritual knowledge, and divine favor could tip the scales in the deceased's favor. Survival was not random, it was earned through attentiveness, moral alignment, and adherence to spiritual principles. This interplay of fear and hope mirrors the broader Egyptian approach to mortality. Death is both dangerous and navigable, terrifying and full of possibility. It is a process that rewards knowledge, preparation, and ethical living, transforming mortality into a structured, manageable journey. The imagery of the weighing of the heart also conveys profound aesthetic and symbolic meaning. The scales themselves represent balance and equilibrium, while the feather embodies truth and cosmic harmony. Anubis' attentive oversight emphasizes protection and guidance, while Thoth's meticulous recording underscores order, measurement, and accountability. Amit's presence, threatening yet controlled, externalizes the consequences of moral failure. Together, these figures create a tableau in which the stakes of existence are rendered tangible, where abstract concepts of morality, justice, and cosmic law are visualized as concrete forces influencing the soul's fate. The process emphasizes personal responsibility and agency. The deceased is not passive but actively participates, invoking spells, presenting evidence of virtue, and navigating the judgment with knowledge and courage. This reflects an Egyptian understanding that the self is not merely subject to fate but capable of influencing its destiny through preparation, ethical conduct, and spiritual alignment. Death is simultaneously inevitable and negotiable, terrifying and conquerable, contingent on one's actions and understanding of the cosmic order. Community and memory also played a role in this judgment. The living could assist the deceased by maintaining tombs, reciting prayers, and offering food, drink, and symbolic sustenance. These acts reinforced the heart's alignment with Ma'at, provided continuity, and ensured the ongoing efficacy of rituals. The judgment was thus both individual and collective, reflecting a society in which mortality and survival beyond death were intertwined with social networks, responsibility, and devotion. Family, priests, and community became active participants in the preservation and success of the soul, reinforcing the interdependence of the living and the dead. In essence, the weighing of the heart represents the ultimate synthesis of Egyptian philosophy, spirituality, and ethics. It integrates the moral, spiritual, and practical dimensions of existence, transforming death from a singular event into a complex, navigable, and morally charged process. The Egyptians recognized that survival beyond life required preparation, knowledge, courage, and alignment with cosmic principles. Ethical living, ritual observance, and attentiveness to the self and community were inseparable from the possibility of eternal life. Ultimately, this ritual encapsulates the Egyptians' profound understanding of mortality. The heart, fragile yet central, embodies the essence of human experience, memory, emotion, decision, and morality. Its judgment represents the convergence of life's actions and the afterlife's consequences, the moment where preparation, intention, and cosmic law intersect. Through this ritual, the Egyptians confronted the deepest fears of existence, obliteration, loss of identity, and the end of consciousness, while offering a pathway through knowledge, virtue, and preparation. It is a vision that transforms death from terror into a structured, meaningful, and ultimately navigable passage, one in which courage, wisdom, and integrity shape the destiny of the soul. In this understanding, the weighing of the heart is not merely a religious ritual, it is a meditation on human existence. It teaches that life is consequential, that morality matters, and that preparation can transform fear into mastery. The Egyptians envisioned mortality as a journey filled with peril and potential, where knowledge, ethics, and devotion determine survival. In the scales of Anubis, beneath the watchful eyes of gods and devourers, the soul's fate is both earned and guided, reflecting a civilization that understood the profound stakes of life, death, and eternity. After the soul had faced judgment, the final stages of its journey demanded transformation, mastery, and integration. The Egyptians believed that survival beyond death was not simply a matter of passing through gates or appeasing gods, it required the successful reunification of the fragmented self into a coherent, effective entity known as the Akh. This luminous, transfigured form was the culmination of a life well lived, a death carefully navigated, and a journey through the Duat meticulously undertaken. The Akh was not merely alive in a spiritual sense, it was powerful, effective, and capable of action, endowed with the ability to influence both the living world and the divine order. In achieving this state, the deceased moved from vulnerability to agency, from mortal limitation to a form of existence that transcended time and space. The process of becoming an Akh was intricate and demanding. It required that the ka, the life force tied to the physical body, remain intact and nourished. Offerings left at tombs, food, drink, incense, sustained this vital essence, creating a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. The ba, the personality or soul capable of movement and independent action, had to successfully navigate the duat, confronting perils, reciting spells, and engaging with divine forces. The successful integration of ka and ba was essential, as only when these elements reunited could the ak emerge. This state was more than symbolic, it represented the full restoration of identity, the triumph of preparation, and the realization of potential beyond mortal constraints. The ak was also a vehicle of influence. Unlike the ka or ba, which were limited in scope, the ak possessed the capacity to act within the world of the living. It could protect, bless, and even intervene in human affairs, reflecting the Egyptians' belief that death did not sever agency but transformed it. The deceased, once fully transfigured, was not removed from the cosmic order but became an active participant, capable of maintaining balance and contributing to the ongoing cycles of life and death. This perspective underscores the Egyptians' understanding of mortality as relational and participatory. The dead remained connected to the living, to the divine, and to the structure of the cosmos itself. Reaching the state of ak was not automatic. It depended upon knowledge, ritual, moral conduct, and preparation. Texts, spells, and inscriptions guided the deceased through the steps required to achieve transformation. Every detail, from proper preservation of the body to accurate recitation of sacred words, was vital. The Egyptians understood that the afterlife was not a static reward for good behavior but a dynamic process demanding engagement, wisdom, and attention. In this sense, death was not an end but a continuous challenge, a test of knowledge, virtue, and preparation carried forward into eternity. Symbolism played a profound role in the emergence of the ak. Luminous depictions in tomb art and funerary texts convey the transformation from mortal fragility to divine efficacy. The ak was often represented with radiant forms, sometimes merging with gods or celestial forces, emphasizing the fusion of human and divine potential. This imagery reflects a belief in the continuity of identity and the possibility of empowerment beyond the limitations of the mortal body. It is a vision that reframes death from loss into transformation, from vulnerability into agency, from cessation into purposeful, enduring existence. Emotionally, the emergence of the ak embodies hope, triumph, and transcendence. The journey through death, with all its fear, judgment, and peril, culminates in a state that affirms the value of preparation, knowledge, and virtue. The ak is not a passive reward but a dynamic, capable presence, illustrating the Egyptians' profound understanding of both human psychology and cosmic law. Survival is contingent upon careful action, moral alignment, and engagement with both material and spiritual dimensions of existence. In this, the Egyptians offer a vision of mortality that is neither arbitrary nor fatalistic, but structured, navigable, and deeply purposeful. The ak also played a vital role in sustaining the community and the ongoing cycles of the cosmos. It was believed that the ak could intercede on behalf of the living, bless offerings, and maintain cosmic balance. In this sense, death was not isolating, it was an extension of life, linking the deceased to the ongoing world and embedding them within the networks of responsibility, devotion, and spiritual influence. The state of ak transformed mortality into continuity, reinforcing the principle that life and death are intertwined, and that the preparation for eternity benefits both the individual and the collective. Material culture supported this transition. Tombs, amulets, inscriptions, and offerings all served to facilitate the emergence of the ak. The preservation of the body, the placement of charms, the careful recitation of texts, and the maintenance of offerings were practical steps that reinforced spiritual transformation. These acts were deeply communal, relying on priests, artisans, and family members to perform them correctly and consistently. The living became partners in the deceased's survival, highlighting the interdependence of the mortal and eternal realms. In achieving the ak, the deceased not only survived but remained an integral participant in the network of cosmic and social relationships. The concept of Ak also underscores the Egyptian understanding of identity as multidimensional. Humans were not singular entities but composites of Ka, Ba, Ak, Run, and Shut, each with distinct properties and roles. Achieving the Ak meant harmonizing these components, ensuring integrity, continuity, and effectiveness beyond death. This holistic view of the self reflects a sophisticated psychological and philosophical awareness, recognizing that survival in the afterlife required balance, preparation, and integration. Identity was not ephemeral but constructed, maintained, and capable of transformation through knowledge, ritual, and moral conduct. Moreover, the state of Ak illuminates the Egyptian vision of immortality as participatory and ethical. Survival beyond death was not merely granted, it was earned through alignment with Ma'at, the cosmic principle of balance and order. Ethical living, adherence to ritual, and preparation for the journey were inseparable from the possibility of becoming an effective, luminous being. Death was not passive, it was an arena in which human agency, morality, and wisdom determined outcomes. In this, the Egyptians reframed mortality as a dynamic challenge, blending fear, hope, and responsibility into a coherent philosophy of life and afterlife. The emotional resonance of this belief system is profound. The Egyptians understood that mortality evokes fear, uncertainty, and grief, yet they transformed these emotions into structured practices, knowledge, and rituals that offered hope, agency, and continuity. The Ak represents the triumph of preparation over chaos, of knowledge over uncertainty, of ethical living over moral collapse. It embodies a civilization's attempt to negotiate the ultimate boundary, creating a vision of existence in which life, death, and eternity are interconnected and navigable. Ultimately, the emergence of the Ak completes the Egyptian journey through death. It is the point at which preparation, knowledge, morality, and ritual converge, producing a state of luminous efficacy that transcends the limitations of the mortal body. The Ak is simultaneously personal and cosmic, active and enduring, reflecting the Egyptian sophisticated understanding of mortality, identity, and continuity. Through this concept, death is transformed from an end into a process, a challenge, and ultimately, a form of mastery over the most profound uncertainties of existence. In achieving the Ak, the Egyptians articulated a philosophy of life and death that integrates preparation, ethics, knowledge, and spiritual practice. The deceased, once mortal, now becomes luminous and effective, capable of sustaining identity, influencing the living world, and participating in the maintenance of cosmic order. This vision illustrates a civilization deeply attuned to the fragility and potential of human existence, one that confronts mortality with intelligence, care, and hope. The Ak is both a promise and a reflection, a promise of survival and continuity, and a reflection of the belief that through preparation, virtue, and knowledge, human life can resonate beyond the confines of time, matter, and mortality. The journey of the Egyptian soul did not end with transformation into the Ak. In fact, this state marked a new phase of existence, one in which the deceased became an active, luminous participant in both the spiritual and earthly realms. The Ak was capable of influencing the living, safeguarding the family, maintaining cosmic balance, and even intervening in the affairs of gods and mortals alike. This understanding reflects a civilization that perceived death not as isolation or cessation but as continuity, responsibility, and interaction. The deceased, having mastered the challenges of the duat and achieved integration, now inhabited a state in which agency, influence, and presence were amplified, reshaping the relationship between life and death. Interaction between the living and the Ak was central to Egyptian belief. Tombs and offerings were not symbolic gestures alone, they were practical means of sustaining the Ka and empowering the Ak. Food, drink, and incense left at the tomb nourished the life force and reinforced the soul's connection to the living world. Priests, family members, and loved ones participated actively, maintaining rituals that ensured protection, guidance, and the continued efficacy of the deceased's influence. In return, the Ak could provide blessings, guidance, and intervention. This reciprocal relationship highlights the Egyptians' view of mortality as interconnected and relational, the dead are never truly absent but remain entwined with the fabric of life, both sustaining and being sustained by the living. The Akh was also intimately tied to the maintenance of Ma'at, the cosmic principle of order, balance, and justice. In life, the individual's actions had consequences. In death, these consequences extended to the spiritual and material realms. The Akh could assist in upholding harmony, ensuring that the cycles of nature, the balance of the cosmos, and the well-being of the living continued. This view positions the dead not merely as passive entities but as active participants in the universe, capable of affecting outcomes, sustaining order, and ensuring the continuation of life's delicate equilibrium. Death, therefore, was not retreat or withdrawal but a transformation into a form of enhanced responsibility and influence. Communication with the Akh involved ritual, language, and symbolism. Spells, hymns, and prayers were recited to invoke the deceased's presence, seek protection, or gain guidance. Objects within tombs, amulets, inscriptions, and representations of the deceased, served as conduits for spiritual interaction. These practices reflect a sophisticated understanding of presence, attention, and intention. The living were not merely remembering the dead but actively participating in the dynamics of continuity and cosmic interdependence. The Akh, in turn, could act in response, influencing both spiritual and material realms. This interaction emphasizes a worldview in which the boundaries between life and death are porous, allowing for dialogue, protection, and collaboration across the threshold of mortality. Ethical and moral considerations remained central even after death. The state of Akh was maintained through continued alignment with Ma'at, the principle of truth and cosmic balance. The deceased could not act arbitrarily, their efficacy depended upon adherence to divine and cosmic laws. This creates a remarkable continuity between life and afterlife. Moral conduct was inseparable from survival, agency, and influence. The Egyptian vision thus integrates ethics, spirituality, and practical action into a cohesive philosophy, where the responsibilities of the living extend into eternity and the dead, once transformed, continue to uphold the principles that govern existence itself. The Akh's ability to act in the world also illustrates the Egyptians' understanding of power as multidimensional. Whereas mortal influence was limited by time, space, and physicality, the Akh transcended these constraints. It could act across temporal and spatial boundaries, affecting outcomes, providing protection, and sustaining memory. This conception of power is both spiritual and relational, reflecting a belief that the individual, properly prepared and morally aligned, can exert influence beyond the limitations of physical life. The Akh is thus a model of enduring agency, a demonstration that careful preparation, ethical conduct, and ritual mastery can transform mortality into a sustained, potent presence. Emotionally, the existence of the Akh offers profound reassurance. Death is terrifying precisely because of its finality and the unknown, yet the Egyptians envisioned a state in which survival, continuity, and influence are achievable. This understanding transforms fear into purpose, life becomes preparation, morality becomes essential, and ritual practice ensures survival. The Akh embodies hope and mastery, illustrating that while death is inevitable, it is neither passive nor devoid of agency. The deceased, through preparation and alignment, can endure, act, and maintain presence, bridging the worlds of the living and the divine. Tombs and material culture continued to support the Akh. Statues, inscriptions, offerings, and ritual objects were not merely commemorative but functional, sustaining the soul's efficacy. The placement of items, the precise recitation of names and spells, and the maintenance of sacred spaces ensured that the Akh remained nourished, powerful, and connected. This reflects a civilization deeply aware of the interplay between material practice and spiritual efficacy. Survival, agency, and influence in the afterlife depended upon both human action and adherence to sacred principles, blending ethics, ritual, and materiality into a cohesive system of continuity. The social dimension of the Akh is equally significant. Family, community, and priests were responsible for sustaining the deceased's power and presence through offerings, prayers, and ritual upkeep. In turn, the Akh could protect, bless, and guide the living, reinforcing the interdependence of life and death. This reciprocal relationship underscores a worldview in which mortality is relational and communal. Survival beyond death is not solitary, it relies on networks of care, devotion, and participation, linking generations across the threshold of mortality. The deceased continues to shape the living world, and the living ensure the continuity and strength of the deceased. Transformation into an Akh also implies a profound psychological insight, that survival is contingent upon integration, preparation, and knowledge. The Egyptians recognized that life's purpose extends beyond immediate experience, that death is a continuation requiring foresight, skill, and moral integrity. The Akh represents the culmination of these principles, a state in which identity, morality, and agency converge, producing a form of existence that is both enduring and influential. It exemplifies a philosophy in which mortality is not annihilation but transformation, where preparation and ethical living create the possibility of enduring presence. Ultimately, the Akh embodies the Egyptians' vision of eternity as active, relational, and moral. Survival beyond death is not passive, it requires knowledge, preparation, ethical alignment, and participation from both the deceased and the living. The Akh acts, influences, and sustains, maintaining balance, continuity, and cosmic order. This conception transforms mortality from fear into mastery, from loss into continuity, from cessation into agency. The Egyptians' vision challenges modern notions of death as isolation or finality, presenting a model in which life and death are inseparably intertwined, and survival beyond mortality is both achievable and purposeful. In this way, the Akh completes the cycle of preparation, judgment, and transformation. It represents the ultimate goal of Egyptian mortuary practice, a luminous, effective, and morally aligned existence that bridges the worlds of the living, the dead, and the divine. The deceased, through careful preparation, ethical living, and ritual observance, achieves a state in which influence, identity, and presence endure, demonstrating a civilization's profound understanding of mortality as both perilous and navigable, terrifying yet conquerable, finite yet capable of resonance across eternity. In ancient Egyptian belief, death was never a solitary or final event, it was intimately connected to memory, remembrance, and the preservation of one's name. The Ren, or true name, was more than a label, it was an essential component of identity, a vessel through which existence could persist. To speak a person's name was to acknowledge them, to give them presence and life in the world of both the living and the dead. Forgetfulness, therefore, was dangerous. If a name was lost to time, if it was never spoken or recorded, the individual risked disintegration, their essence dissolving into nothingness. The Egyptians understood that survival beyond death was as much about social and cultural continuity as it was about ritual, morality, or preservation of the body. Memory was a form of immortality, and the Ren was the bridge connecting the physical, spiritual, and communal dimensions of life. Names were meticulously recorded in tombs, inscriptions, and funerary texts. Hieroglyphs carved into stone or painted on walls ensured that the deceased's Ren would endure for eternity. Each depiction was carefully chosen, not only to identify the individual but to safeguard them against oblivion. The act of inscription was both practical and magical. Writing the name invoked its presence, anchored it in reality, and created a channel through which the Ka, Ba, and eventually the Akh could operate effectively. The Egyptians recognized that mortality extends beyond the body, it encompasses memory, recognition, and acknowledgement. To exist in the afterlife, one's identity had to be continually reinforced through the conscious acts of remembrance by the living. Tombs were more than repositories for the body, they were vessels for memory. Every object, every image, every text was designed to preserve the deceased's identity and ensure that their name was continually invoked. Scenes of family, offerings, and rituals depicted on walls functioned as living reminders, allowing the Ren to remain active and present. Offerings of food, drink, and incense served to sustain not only the Ka but also the recognition of the deceased by the living, maintaining a dynamic connection between worlds. In this way, the Egyptians treated memory as a form of life, ensuring that identity persisted across both temporal and metaphysical dimensions. The relationship between memory and survival also had profound social and communal implications. The living were essential participants in the maintenance of the run. Without the devotion of family, priests, and community members, the deceased risked fading from existence. Funerary rituals, prayers, and offerings were not symbolic alone, they were practical mechanisms to sustain identity and reinforce the presence of the deceased. The act of remembrance became a moral and spiritual duty, linking generations across the boundaries of life and death. In honoring the dead, the living also maintained cosmic balance, participating in the cycles of continuity and ma'at. Memory was thus both personal and communal, an ethical and metaphysical responsibility that transcended individual existence. The Egyptians also understood the psychological dimension of remembrance. Forgetting, or being forgotten, was the ultimate threat, representing erasure, nullification, and the loss of self. In this sense, death was not simply the cessation of physical life but a confrontation with the fragility of identity. The fear of oblivion was mitigated through deliberate action, inscribing names, maintaining tombs, performing rituals, and cultivating remembrance. Memory became a safeguard, a lifeline for the soul, and a mechanism through which identity could endure. By prioritizing the preservation of the run, the Egyptians acknowledged the profound human desire for continuity and the anxiety inherent in mortality. Names also had a performative power. Speaking a person's run invoked their presence and, in some beliefs, allowed them to act. This is why funerary texts often contained repeated repetitions of the deceased's name, ensuring that it was constantly invoked and that the individual remained active in both the spiritual and social realms. The run, therefore, was not a passive identifier, it was an agent of continuity, enabling the deceased to participate in rituals, receive offerings, and influence the world of the living. This conception highlights a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between language, identity, and survival. Words, when properly applied, could sustain life beyond death. The significance of the run also extended into art and iconography. Depictions of the deceased often accompanied inscriptions of their name, creating a dual representation of identity, visual and verbal. The images acted as a focus for recognition and remembrance, while the name anchored the essence of the individual. Together, they formed a system in which identity was reinforced, memory was preserved, and the soul was supported. This holistic approach illustrates the Egyptians' awareness of identity as multidimensional, requiring integration across physical, spiritual, and social domains. Preservation of the name was inseparable from preservation of the body, performance of rituals, and alignment with cosmic law. The integration of memory into the afterlife also underscores the Egyptians' profound philosophical insight: existence is relational. To survive beyond death is not solely a matter of bodily preservation or spiritual transformation, it also requires acknowledgement by others, continual remembrance, and participation in social and cosmic networks. The living ensure the survival of the dead, and the dead, in turn, maintain cosmic and social order. In this sense, memory functions as both protection and empowerment, sustaining the run, reinforcing identity, and enabling agency across temporal and spiritual boundaries. Mortality, then, is not only a personal challenge but a shared responsibility. Emotionally, the emphasis on the run reflects a deep understanding of fear, hope, and continuity. The Egyptians recognized the terror of being forgotten, of losing identity, and of vanishing entirely. At the same time, they offered a pathway to survival through memory, inscription, and ritual. The act of remembrance becomes a source of reassurance and empowerment, allowing the deceased to endure, act, and remain present. Memory transforms fear into continuity, vulnerability into agency, and mortality into an opportunity for enduring existence. The maintenance of the run also intersects with other aspects of Egyptian belief. It works in concert with the preservation of the body, the rituals supporting the ka, the journey of the ba, and the transformation into the ak. Together, these elements create a comprehensive system in which identity, morality, and agency are sustained. Forgetting the Ren disrupts this system, jeopardizing continuity, while careful preservation ensures that the deceased remains effective, luminous, and present. Memory, therefore, is both functional and metaphysical, linking the tangible and intangible, the living and the dead, the mortal and the eternal. In conclusion, the Ren embodies the Egyptians' understanding that survival beyond death is as much social and cultural as it is spiritual and physical. Names are powerful, memory is vital, and remembrance is both an ethical and metaphysical obligation. By preserving the Ren through inscriptions, rituals, and the devotion of the living, the deceased remains present, effective, and influential. The Ren bridges the realms of life and death, sustaining identity, enabling agency, and ensuring that mortality does not lead to oblivion. In this way, the Egyptians transformed memory into immortality, illustrating that continuity, recognition, and reverence are essential to surviving beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. The physical environment of ancient Egypt, the Nile River, its surrounding deserts, and the annual cycles of flooding and drought, shaped not only the daily life of its people but also their beliefs about death and the afterlife. For the Egyptians, the natural world was inseparable from the spiritual. The patterns of the river, the rise and fall of the sun, and the fertility of the land became metaphors and models for existence, mortality, and eternity. The Nile's floodwaters, which brought both destruction and renewal, mirrored the cycles of life and death. Just as the land was submerged and then reborn with fertile silt, the soul too could descend into the underworld and emerge transformed, nourished, and renewed. In this way, the Egyptians read the landscape as a guide to understanding the afterlife, integrating observation of the natural world with spiritual philosophy and ritual practice. The deserts surrounding the Nile were equally significant in shaping perceptions of death. Arid, harsh, and seemingly lifeless, they became the setting for tombs, necropolises, and sacred burial sites. The desert symbolized both danger and protection. It threatened decay and destruction but also preserved, providing a barrier against human interference and natural deterioration. Tombs built in these barren regions were insulated from the chaos of the living world, creating spaces where the deceased could safely undergo transformation and achieve continuity. The Egyptians saw the desert as a liminal zone, a threshold between life and eternity, a place where the soul could transition without interference. The harshness of the environment reinforced the necessity of preparation, preservation, and ritual. Survival beyond death, like survival in the desert, required knowledge, skill, and careful planning. The cyclical movements of the sun also deeply influenced Egyptian conceptions of death and rebirth. The sun god Ra's nightly journey through the Duat, descending into darkness and emerging at dawn, provided a powerful metaphor for mortality and transformation. Just as the sun disappears each night only to be reborn, the soul too could traverse peril, darkness, and judgment, emerging renewed as an Ankh. Tomb art and inscriptions often depict this solar cycle, illustrating the challenges of the underworld and the promise of resurrection. The Egyptians drew direct correlations between cosmic rhythms and human destiny, understanding that the natural world reflected spiritual truths. Life, death, and eternity were not separate, they were interconnected through cycles of decay and renewal observed in the heavens, the river, and the land. The Nile itself was central not only as a source of sustenance but as a symbolic model for the flow of life and the afterlife. Its waters carried life-giving silt, transported goods, and facilitated travel, creating a dynamic network connecting communities and supporting civilization. In death, this flow became metaphorical. The journey of the soul mirrored the river's path, navigating currents, encountering obstacles, and reaching new realms of existence. Just as the river's flood could both destroy and nourish, death was understood as a dual process, perilous yet transformative, ending yet beginning anew. The Egyptians integrated these observations into funerary practice, placing tombs near the Nile or orienting them according to celestial and terrestrial patterns to ensure alignment with cosmic forces. The desert and the river together create a striking duality in Egyptian thought: danger and protection, chaos and order, death and renewal. Tombs were constructed in areas that balanced these forces, using the environment as both shield and metaphor. The physical isolation of the desert protected the body and preserved tombs, while the Nile's proximity connected the deceased to life, sustenance, and the cycles of nature. This interplay reflects the Egyptians' holistic worldview. The natural environment was inseparable from spiritual practice, moral preparation, and the journey of the soul. Understanding, respecting, and engaging with the environment became part of preparation for eternity. Flora and fauna also played symbolic roles in shaping beliefs about death and continuity. Animals such as the ibis, crocodile, and falcon were associated with gods, protection, and spiritual power. Certain plants, like papyrus, became symbols of regeneration and eternal life, their forms depicted in tomb art, funerary texts, and ritual objects. These elements reinforced the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds, demonstrating that the Egyptians perceived meaning and agency in the living environment. Nature was not neutral, it was imbued with intention, symbolism, and guidance for the living and the dead alike. Understanding these patterns was essential for survival beyond death, informing rituals, tomb construction, and the preparation of the soul. The alignment of tombs and pyramids with celestial and terrestrial features further illustrates this integration. Structures were positioned according to solar, lunar, and stellar patterns, reflecting a belief that harmony with cosmic and terrestrial forces enhanced survival in the afterlife. The journey of the deceased was mirrored by celestial cycles, creating a correspondence between the movement of heavenly bodies and the soul's navigation of the duat. The environment, therefore, was not merely backdrop but active participant, shaping preparation, influencing ritual efficacy, and reinforcing the connection between life, death, and eternity. Emotionally, the Egyptians' engagement with the environment reflects a profound sensitivity to mortality and continuity. They recognized the fragility of life and the unpredictability of natural forces, yet they transformed observation into ritual, symbolism, and practical guidance for survival beyond death. The river, the desert, the sun, the stars, and the flora and fauna were all integrated into a holistic understanding of existence. Death was not chaotic but mirrored in the rhythms of the world. Survival depended on preparation, alignment, and understanding. By reading the environment, Egyptians created a system in which life, death, and eternity were interconnected, providing both caution and reassurance. The environment also shaped funerary practice in concrete ways. Materials for mummification, tomb construction, and ritual objects were sourced from the land: natron for desiccation, limestone for tomb walls, resin for preservation. The Egyptians combined observation of natural properties with ritual purpose, transforming the environment into tools for continuity. They understood that the physical landscape and its resources could be harnessed to support spiritual survival, creating a direct link between earthly knowledge and eternal efficacy. This integration of environment and ritual underscores their sophisticated approach to mortality. The land, river, and cosmos were not passive but active partners in the journey of the soul. Ultimately, the Egyptian environment was both metaphor and mechanism for death and afterlife. The Nile's cycles, the desert's harshness, the sun's journey, and the natural rhythms of life all informed a worldview in which mortality was understood, navigable, and connected to larger cosmic patterns. Tombs, rituals, and offerings were designed to harmonize with these forces, ensuring survival, transformation, and continuity. The landscape itself became a teacher, guide, and protector, demonstrating that the natural world and the afterlife were inseparable. By integrating observation, symbolism, and ritual, the Egyptians created a vision of death that was simultaneously practical, spiritual, and profoundly reflective of the human desire to endure. Through this lens, the environment emerges not merely as a backdrop but as an active, guiding presence in Egyptian mortality. Life, death, and eternity were inseparably entwined with rivers, deserts, stars, and flora. Understanding, aligning with, and ritualizing the environment became essential for navigating the afterlife. In this way, the Egyptians transformed the natural world into both metaphor and mechanism, a system through which mortality could be confronted, structured, and ultimately mastered. The land and sky were partners in survival, offering both challenges and guidance, and reinforcing the profound connection between human existence and the rhythms of the cosmos. Rituals and ceremonies were at the heart of the Egyptian approach to death, forming the bridge between mortal life and the eternal afterlife. These practices were not mere formalities or cultural embellishments, they were essential mechanisms that ensured the survival, transformation, and efficacy of the soul. From the moment of death, a complex network of rites was set into motion, beginning with the care of the body and extending into ceremonies that spanned days, months, and even years. Every gesture, word, and offering carried significance, functioning simultaneously as a practical act, a spiritual safeguard, and a symbolic assertion of continuity. The Egyptians understood that the afterlife was not automatic, it required careful orchestration, ritual knowledge, and human devotion. The embalming and mummification process was the first and perhaps most crucial ritual. It involved meticulous preservation of the body, which the Egyptians considered the anchor for the Ka, or life force. The process combined empirical observation with spiritual intention. Techniques such as evisceration, desiccation using natron, and the application of resins and oils were informed by careful experimentation to prevent decay. At the same time, these procedures were deeply ritualized. Prayers, incantations, and magical gestures accompanied each step, ensuring that the physical transformation also facilitated spiritual continuity. The body became more than a vessel, it was a sacred instrument prepared to sustain identity and power in the afterlife. Following embalming, the opening of the mouth ceremony exemplified the Egyptians' belief in the active relationship between ritual and functionality. This rite involved touching the mouth, eyes, and limbs of the deceased with ritual instruments, symbolically restoring the ability to see, speak, and act in the afterlife. It reflected a profound understanding that survival beyond death required not only the preservation of the body but the restoration of agency. The ceremony was intricate and precise, combining symbolic gestures with spoken words that invoked divine protection and empowerment. Through this act, the deceased was enabled to interact with the world, receive offerings, and navigate the challenges of the duat. Offerings and libations were integral to ritual practice and were maintained long after burial. Food, drink, incense, and symbolic items were presented to sustain the Ka and nourish the Ak. These offerings reinforced a continuous relationship between the living and the dead, creating a reciprocal system in which devotion from the living maintained the deceased's power and presence. Funerary texts, including the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead, often instructed the living on how to perform these offerings properly. Every element of ritual was designed to maintain efficacy, the timing, the type of offering, and even the orientation of objects mattered. Ritual was both technical and spiritual, ensuring that survival was structured, reliable, and effective. Prayers, hymns, and recitations also played a central role in Egyptian death rites. Spoken words were considered powerful, capable of activating divine protection, guiding the soul, and sustaining the components of identity. Repetition, precision, and proper enunciation were critical. Errors could compromise the efficacy of the ritual. Texts were recited to awaken the Ka, empower the Ba, and facilitate the emergence of the Ak. These verbal acts reflect a sophisticated understanding of language as both functional and sacred, demonstrating that survival beyond death relied not only on physical preservation but also on the careful deployment of knowledge, intention, and devotion. Communal participation in rituals was equally significant. Priests, family members, and professional mourners contributed to the rites, performing ceremonies, reciting prayers, and ensuring the proper observance of every detail. The living acted as intermediaries, maintaining cosmic balance and sustaining the deceased's presence. This collective engagement underscores the relational nature of mortality in Egyptian thought. Survival was not an isolated act but a shared responsibility. Life, death, and afterlife formed a continuum in which human agency and communal devotion were indispensable. The dead relied on the living, and the living, through ritual and remembrance, maintained order, protection, and continuity. Funerary architecture itself was a manifestation of ritual practice. Tombs, pyramids, and mortuary temples were constructed according to precise specifications, aligned with celestial patterns, and designed to facilitate the journey of the soul. Chambers, corridors, and niches were arranged to accommodate offerings, support ritual activity, and provide symbolic representations of the underworld. Wall art and inscriptions reinforced ritual efficacy, offering guidance, protection, and magical empowerment to the deceased. Every aspect of the tomb, from layout to decoration, functioned as part of a comprehensive ritual system, blending architecture, art, and spiritual practice into a coherent strategy for survival. Rituals also addressed the dangers inherent in the afterlife. Spells, amulets, and protective inscriptions were designed to ward off malevolent forces encountered in the duat. These practices reflect the Egyptians' perception of death as a perilous journey, one in which preparation and ritual knowledge were essential for overcoming threats. Guardians, monsters, and trials were encountered not only in myth but in the symbolic and metaphysical dimensions of ritual. By performing these rites correctly, the deceased was equipped with the tools, guidance, and protection needed to navigate the underworld and emerge transformed and empowered. The emotional dimension of ritual cannot be overstated. Ceremonies provided solace, continuity, and connection for both the living and the dead. Mourning, celebration, and devotion were intertwined, transforming grief into structured activity that reinforced memory and identity. Rituals offered the living a way to process loss while simultaneously sustaining the deceased. In this way, ritual was both functional and profoundly human, addressing fear, hope, and the desire for continuity in a world that spanned life, death, and eternity. Over time, Egyptian rituals evolved, incorporating new insights, innovations, and adaptations to changing dynastic practices. Yet the central principles remained consistent: preservation of the body, activation of spiritual power, maintenance of ethical alignment, and engagement with cosmic and communal networks. Rituals created a holistic system in which the deceased's survival was maximized through preparation, performance, and relational interaction. Life and death were inseparable. Survival depended on adherence to structured, meaningful, and spiritually efficacious practices. Ultimately, rituals were the backbone of Egyptian mortality. They transformed death from chaos into order, fear into purpose, and vulnerability into agency. Through mummification, ceremonies, offerings, prayers, and architectural design, the Egyptians created a multidimensional system for survival, guiding the soul through peril, judgment, and transformation. Ritual was not an adjunct to belief, it was belief made active, a practical and spiritual methodology ensuring that life, death, and eternity were integrated, navigable, and coherent. The depth and sophistication of these practices reveal a civilization deeply attuned to mortality, identity, and continuity. Rituals were a means of mastery over the unknown, providing structure, guidance, and protection in the face of existential uncertainty. By participating in, observing, and performing these ceremonies, the Egyptians bridged worlds, maintained cosmic balance, and ensured that death became not an end but a carefully managed transformation. Ritual, in its complexity and precision, embodies the Egyptian understanding that survival beyond mortality requires preparation, devotion, knowledge, and relational engagement, reflecting a profound and enduring philosophy of life, death, and eternity. Magic, or Heka as the ancient Egyptians called it, permeated every aspect of their understanding of life, death, and the afterlife. Unlike the modern conception of magic as illusion or entertainment, Heka was a fundamental force woven into the fabric of existence, a principle that connected the natural, human, and divine realms. The Egyptians believed that the universe was governed by laws, forces, and energies, and that Heka allowed humans and gods to manipulate, protect, and interact with these forces. In the context of death, magic was essential. It empowered the deceased, safeguarded them against the perils of the duat, and ensured that spells, names, and ritual acts could effectively shape reality. Without Heka, even the most meticulously prepared tomb, the most carefully recited spell, or the most faithfully preserved body could fail to secure eternal survival. Magic was both practical and symbolic. Amulets, for example, were imbued with Heka and strategically placed on the body during mummification. Scarabs, eyes of Horus, and other symbols were believed to confer protection, vitality, and divine favor. Each amulet was carefully chosen to counter specific threats, serpents, demons, or destructive forces that the deceased might encounter in the duat. These objects were more than charms, they were functional tools in a metaphysical toolkit, allowing the soul to act effectively in realms beyond the living. Placement, orientation, and ritual activation were all essential, demonstrating that Egyptian magic was systematic, precise, and deeply integrated into broader spiritual and ethical frameworks. Words themselves were potent instruments of magic. Spells, incantations, and hymns recited during funerary rituals served to animate the deceased, guide them through obstacles, and invoke protection from gods. The careful pronunciation of names, phrases, and formulas was believed to activate supernatural forces and influence outcomes in the afterlife. Recitations from the Book of the Dead, pyramid texts, and coffin texts exemplify this principle. They provided detailed instructions for navigating gates, confronting guardians, and ensuring moral alignment. Magic, in this sense, was inseparable from knowledge and action. The power of a spell depended upon the wisdom, intention, and precision of the practitioner. The Egyptians also understood magic as relational. Its efficacy depended not solely on the deceased or the practitioner but on interaction with cosmic and divine forces. Rituals activated this connection, drawing on the power of gods, celestial cycles, and natural patterns. For instance, invoking Osiris, Thoth, or Anubis in funerary spells linked the deceased to divine protection, cosmic order, and moral authority. Heka functioned as a bridge, connecting the living, the dead, and the divine, enabling cooperation across realms and reinforcing the interconnectedness of existence. The deceased, empowered through magic, could navigate the duat, overcome peril, and ultimately achieve the luminous state of Ak. The conceptualization of magic also reflects the Egyptians' understanding of mortality as active and participatory. Death was not passive, it demanded engagement, skill, and empowerment. Magic allowed the deceased to act, defend, and transform, reinforcing the principle that survival depended on preparation, knowledge, and agency. It extended human and spiritual capabilities, providing tools to manipulate the unseen forces of the universe. Through Heka, the Egyptians acknowledged both the dangers of mortality and the potential for mastery, framing death as a challenge that could be navigated with wisdom, skill, and ritual precision. Protective magic was particularly critical during the perilous journey through the underworld. The duat was imagined as a realm filled with guardians, serpents, and hostile forces capable of destroying unprepared souls. Magical spells, symbols, and rituals served as weapons, shields, and guides. They enabled the deceased to recognize dangers, neutralize threats, and interact successfully with divine and supernatural beings. Each obstacle was met not only with knowledge but with empowered action, demonstrating that the Egyptians' conception of magic was dynamic. It transformed fear into competence and chaos into order. Survival depended on the active application of mystical forces, integrated seamlessly with moral conduct and ritual practice. Emotionally, magic also offered reassurance and hope. The uncertainties of death, the terror of judgment, and the perils of the duat could inspire anxiety and despair. Magic provided a framework in which these fears could be mitigated. Through preparation, ritual, and invocation, the deceased could gain protection, guidance, and the capacity to act. Heka transformed vulnerability into agency, uncertainty into structured practice, and fear into the possibility of triumph. It exemplified the Egyptian psychological sophistication, recognizing that human apprehension in the face of mortality could be addressed through deliberate, empowered action. Magic was also deeply intertwined with ethics and morality. Successful application of Heka required alignment with Ma'at, the principle of balance and cosmic order. Spells, rituals, and magical objects were not effective in isolation. Their efficacy depended on the deceased's ethical conduct in life and the correct performance of rites by the living. This integration underscores a central Egyptian insight: survival, power, and influence are contingent upon alignment with moral and cosmic law. Magic was a tool, but it was one that functioned within a broader ethical and spiritual framework, reinforcing the inseparability of morality, preparation, and empowerment. The social dimension of magic is equally significant. Priests, ritual specialists, and family members performed acts of Heka to support the deceased, reinforcing protection, efficacy, and remembrance. This communal engagement ensured that magical practice was sustained across time, linking generations in a network of care and devotion. Magic, therefore, was not merely personal but social and relational, extending the influence of the living into the spiritual survival of the deceased. Heka maintained continuity, reinforced identity, and enabled participation in the ongoing cycles of life, death, and eternity. Magic was also visual and symbolic. Tomb paintings, carvings, and inscriptions were not decorative but functional, activating protective and guiding forces for the deceased. Representations of gods, sacred animals, and cosmic symbols infused the space with Heka, creating an environment in which the soul could act effectively. These visual elements worked in tandem with spells, rituals, and amulets, forming a multidimensional system that bridged the physical, spiritual, and symbolic. Every depiction was intentional, reinforcing continuity, efficacy, and agency in the afterlife. Ultimately, magic in Egyptian thought embodies the integration of preparation, knowledge, ethics, and spiritual practice. It transformed death from passive cessation into active navigation, equipping the deceased to confront perils, engage with divine forces, and achieve transformation into the Akh. Heka was both tool and principle, enabling mastery over mortality and connecting the living, the dead, and the cosmos in a dynamic network of power, protection, and continuity. Through this lens, the Egyptian conception of magic reveals a civilization deeply attuned to the challenges of mortality. Magic was practical, relational, ethical, and empowering, providing mechanisms through which the fear of death could be transformed into capability, uncertainty into structure, and vulnerability into agency. It exemplifies the Egyptians' holistic approach. Survival beyond death depended not solely on the body or the soul, but on the integration of ritual, knowledge, ethics, and mystical force. Magic, in essence, was the engine that enabled life to resonate beyond death, connecting mortality with eternity and action with transformation. Art and symbolism were not mere embellishments in ancient Egyptian culture, they were essential instruments for understanding, navigating, and influencing the journey of the soul. From tomb walls to funerary objects, every depiction was charged with purpose, bridging the material and spiritual realms. The Egyptians believed that images were not passive representations but active channels for magical and spiritual efficacy. A painted god, an inscribed spell, or a carved hieroglyph could invoke protection, guide the deceased, or animate ritual power. Art became a form of communication with the divine, a tool for survival beyond death, and a medium through which mortality, memory, and eternity could be intertwined. The visual language of tombs was remarkably sophisticated. Scenes depicted the deceased performing daily activities, receiving offerings, or interacting with gods. These depictions were not merely illustrative but functional, ensuring that the soul could continue its activities in the afterlife. A painting of a banquet was not just an artistic record, it symbolically provided sustenance to the Ka and Akh. Images of boats traversing the Duat allowed the soul to navigate the underworld safely, while depictions of enemies or demons bound the forces of chaos, neutralizing threats through representation. In this way, art was simultaneously narrative, ritual, and protective, creating a multidimensional system in which visual forms were as vital as physical preparation or magical practice. Symbolism in Egyptian art was layered and precise. Colors, postures, and spatial arrangements all carried meaning. Gold symbolized eternal life and divine power, while green represented fertility and rebirth. The orientation of figures, whether facing east toward the rising sun or west toward the land of the dead, was deliberate, aligning the deceased with cosmic cycles. Even the smallest hieroglyph could carry weighty significance, functioning as a key to unlock protection, guidance, or empowerment. Art was therefore a language, codified and intentional, capable of influencing the spiritual and metaphysical dimensions of existence. Knowledge of this visual grammar was essential. Improper depiction could compromise ritual efficacy or spiritual survival. Animals featured prominently in symbolic art, embodying gods, protection, and metaphysical principles. The ibis represented Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, facilitating the recording of judgment and the guidance of the soul. The jackal, associated with Anubis, symbolized protection, embalming, and oversight of the deceased. Lions, crocodiles, and serpents could embody both threats and protective forces, illustrating the duality of danger and safeguard in the afterlife. By representing these animals in tombs, amulets, and artifacts, the Egyptians created a visual network of protection and empowerment, allowing the deceased to navigate the duat effectively. The presence of these symbols reflects an understanding that survival required not only moral and ritual preparation but also engagement with metaphysical forces in both conceptual and visual forms. Scenes of gods and the deceased interacting were also crucial. Osiris, god of the dead, was depicted as a mummified ruler, granting authority, resurrection, and access to the afterlife. Other deities, such as Ma'at, Thoth, and Hathor, appeared in roles that emphasized judgment, guidance, and protection. These depictions were functional. They reminded the deceased of the forces they could call upon, outlined the structure of the afterlife, and reinforced moral and cosmic principles. The art provided a roadmap, visual instructions that complemented textual guidance from funerary spells and inscriptions. Through these images, the Egyptians transformed walls into guides, illustrations into protections, and symbols into active agents in the journey of the soul. The architecture of tombs also served symbolic and ritual purposes. The layout, orientation, and spatial arrangement of chambers reflected cosmological principles, facilitating movement and continuity of the soul. Corridors represented journeys through the underworld, chambers symbolized stages of transformation, and the positioning of statues and reliefs ensured alignment with both cosmic and earthly forces. Art within these spaces reinforced these structures, providing guidance, sustenance, and empowerment. Tombs thus became multidimensional environments in which architecture, art, and ritual coalesced into a coherent system for survival, transformation, and eternal efficacy. Funerary objects, from shabdas to amulets, extended symbolic art into practical use. Shabdi figurines, for instance, were miniature servants, depicted performing labor on behalf of the deceased in the afterlife. Their forms, inscriptions, and placement were carefully designed to activate this magical function. Similarly, amulets were shaped and decorated to convey protection, vitality, or divine favor. Every artifact was both artistic and functional, ensuring that visual form translated directly into metaphysical effect. Art was thus inseparable from magic, ritual, and ethical preparation, reinforcing the Egyptians' holistic understanding of mortality. Emotionally, symbolic art served to connect the living and the dead. Tombs decorated with familiar scenes of daily life, family interactions, and religious rituals provided comfort, continuity, and a sense of ongoing presence. For the living, these images reinforced memory and devotion, ensuring that the deceased remained connected and remembered. For the dead, they acted as channels through which the soul could access sustenance, guidance, and protection. Art, in this way, was both practical and profoundly human, bridging fear, hope, and continuity across the boundary of mortality. The integration of text and image further enhanced the power of Egyptian art. Hieroglyphs, inscriptions, and spell texts were often combined with visual representations, creating multidimensional instructions for survival. Words activated the depicted forms, while images reinforced the written spells, creating a feedback loop of efficacy. This interplay of visual and textual elements illustrates the Egyptians' understanding that survival required coordination of multiple channels: physical, spiritual, symbolic, and cognitive. Art was not decoration, it was an active, functional medium that made survival tangible, navigable, and effective. Ultimately, Egyptian art and symbolism reveal a civilization that perceived mortality as a dynamic, interconnected, and navigable system. Visual forms were not passive, they were instruments of protection, guidance, empowerment, and continuity. Through precise depiction, careful symbolism, and integration with ritual and magic, art became a means of navigating the afterlife, sustaining identity, and ensuring the survival of the soul. The Egyptians understood that existence extended beyond the physical body and that mortality could be negotiated, structured, and mastered through intentional, functional visual practice. In essence, art in ancient Egypt was the language of eternity. Every line, color, and form carried significance, connecting the mortal to the divine, the living to the dead, and the present to eternity. Tombs, artifacts, and inscriptions were more than records, they were active participants in the survival, transformation, and empowerment of the soul. Through this rich symbolic system, the Egyptians transformed fear into preparation, uncertainty into guidance, and death into a structured, navigable journey, demonstrating a profound awareness of the inseparability of visual expression, spiritual practice, and metaphysical survival. Music, chants, and ritualized sound formed another vital dimension of Egyptian funerary practice, complementing visual art, magic, and ritual to create a multidimensional system for navigating death. Sound was not merely aesthetic, it was considered a powerful medium through which spiritual energy could be activated, protection invoked, and the deceased empowered. Priests, mourners, and ritual specialists used specific rhythms, intonations, and melodic patterns to awaken the Ka, guide the Ba, and facilitate the transformation into the Ak. Hymns, chants, and the vocalization of sacred texts functioned as instruments of Heka, bridging the human, natural, and divine realms and enabling active participation in the cosmic order. The role of music in funerary contexts was both practical and symbolic. Percussive instruments, flutes, sistrums, and other ritual implements produced sounds believed to attract divine attention, repel malevolent forces, and harmonize the energies of the underworld. The sistrum, in particular, was associated with Hathor, goddess of the afterlife and protector of the dead, whose rattling sound was said to awaken spiritual forces and grant protection. Chanting priests synchronized their voices with these instruments, creating layered soundscapes that enveloped the tomb and invoked the presence of gods. Sound, like art and amulets, became an active agent, shaping the metaphysical environment and ensuring that the deceased could act effectively in both the spiritual and earthly realms. Vocal recitations were essential to activate spells and ritual efficacy. The precise pronunciation of hieroglyphs, sacred names, and formulaic texts was believed to generate magical force. The spoken word carried Heka, bridging thought, intention, and reality. Funerary hymns outlined journeys through the Duat, called upon protective deities, and reinforced ethical alignment. This interplay of voice, intention, and divine interaction demonstrates the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of language as both functional and sacred, a tool for ensuring survival beyond death. The act of speaking was not symbolic alone, it had tangible consequences in the spiritual and material realms. Chanting also reinforced communal participation in death rituals. Families, priests, and professional mourners joined in vocalized ceremonies, creating a collective sound that amplified protective power and spiritual efficacy. This communal aspect emphasizes the relational nature of mortality in Egyptian thought. Survival was dependent on both personal preparation and the active involvement of the living. Sound linked generations, sustained memory, and reinforced identity. The auditory dimension transformed grief and devotion into practical and spiritual action, ensuring that the deceased remained nourished, empowered, and connected across realms. Rhythm and repetition played critical roles in funerary soundscapes. Repeating chants, beats, and hymns created a meditative and hypnotic environment, reinforcing focus, intention, and spiritual resonance. This repetition mirrored the cycles of nature, the rising and setting sun, the flooding of the Nile, and the rhythm of the seasons, linking the deceased's journey to cosmic patterns. Sound was thus not only functional but reflective, aligning human action with natural and divine order. The Egyptians perceived mortality as an extension of these rhythms, and ritualized sound became a medium through which continuity and transformation were enacted. Emotionally, music and chant transformed the experience of death for both the living and the dead. Mourners expressed grief, devotion, and hope through sound, creating an atmosphere of care and continuity. For the deceased, the soundscape provided guidance, protection, and empowerment, transforming vulnerability into agency. The integration of auditory, visual, and ritual elements created a holistic environment in which fear, uncertainty, and mortality could be managed, reframed, and navigated with precision. Sound reinforced memory, identity, and cosmic alignment, demonstrating that mortality required attention not only to physical and symbolic preparation but also to immersive, multisensory engagement. Specific funerary hymns and chants were designed to address the challenges of the duat. They narrated journeys, called upon gods, and outlined protective measures against hostile forces. By vocalizing these texts, the living activated their power, allowing the deceased to move confidently through danger, encounter divine judges, and ultimately achieve transformation into the Akh. Sound, in this sense, was both a guide and a shield, merging intention, knowledge, and metaphysical force into a cohesive system for survival. Sound also had a temporal dimension, structured to accompany stages of the journey from death to the afterlife. Immediate rituals following death employed chanting and instruments to awaken spiritual forces and protect the body. Later ceremonies sustained offerings, reinforced remembrance, and ensured that the Ka, Ba, and Akh remained nourished and effective. This temporal layering of sound underscores the Egyptians' sophisticated approach to continuity, integrating auditory practice with ritual, art, magic, and moral preparation. Ultimately, the use of music, chant, and ritualized sound exemplifies the Egyptians' holistic understanding of mortality and survival. Sound was active, relational, protective, and empowering, forming a critical component of a complex system that included body preservation, magic, visual symbolism, ritual practice, and ethical alignment. It demonstrates the civilization's awareness that survival beyond death required multisensory engagement, precision, and ongoing participation from both the living and the dead. Sound transformed the abstract into the tangible, the perilous into the navigable, and the unknown into a structured journey. Through these practices, the Egyptians integrated emotional, spiritual, and practical dimensions into the afterlife. Chanting, music, and ritual sound were not ancillary but essential, providing both guidance and protection, reinforcing memory and identity, and creating a bridge between mortal and eternal existence. In this way, the auditory dimension of Egyptian funerary practice complements and amplifies visual, magical, and ritual systems, ensuring that death is not the end but an immersive, navigable, and structured passage. Sound, like art and magic, became a medium through which life could resonate beyond death, linking the living, the deceased, and the divine in a dynamic network of continuity, empowerment, and cosmic alignment.